The events of our story begin with a kid named Michael going back in time to when he was 18. He is greatly tormented by the thought that all the progress he has made in life has at one point deserted him. In the past, when he was only 20 years old, he took on a mission that he failed, for which he was punished and disabled. Immediately after that, our hero Michael fell into complete despair. He did not know what to do, and now he is an ordinary invalid. With the money from the wound, he bought himself the most banal old house, in which he decided to settle down for a few months. This purchase inspired him to start his own real estate business, which he did. After a year of business development, he managed to create a whole network. Already half of the continent was under his management. However, the monster gate opened one day and began to pose a huge threat to his business, but also a new profit. Fortunately, he managed to avoid all the problems, and in a few years, in his 40s, he was one of the richest men. However, now he's back in his 18s, and now he doesn't have anything that he had before, and this eyed him much sadness. All he had left was the purple bracelet he had gotten just before he went back. This bracelet was given to him by the Emperor, the same one who is the strongest person on Earth. The Emperor came to him and offered to receive the trophy they had commandeered in the war, for a fee of course. Our hero understood the importance of such things, but made a very indifferent appearance, as if he was not interested in it all at all. The Emperor set a price of 10 trillion for the item. This did not please Michael, and he walked away, rejecting the offer. However, the Emperor had a very strong desire to sell this item to Jersey, so he insisted on making a deal. The Emperor claimed that the thing was capable of restoring meridians, and Michael put a price of 100 million for the thing. The Emperor agreed to such a price and did not even argue with our hero, after which the deal was finalized. Altogether, they began to celebrate such a purchase, drinking, going out, and just having fun all together. The rest of Michael's acquaintances began to gather as well, and today, last shopping, he was about to embark on a well-deserved vacation. Mike was most interested in how the device worked and how he should use it better in order to have an effect. In his bed, Michael poked his fingers frequently, and at one point, someone abruptly lit up with a purple flame. Now Michael went back in time and realized that the Emperor had simply tricked him when he gave the bracelet to him. Meanwhile, the landlord's son broke into the current apartment and started demanding payment. This greatly saddened our hero. However, he realized that that kid was just stupid and take advantage of his status and nothing more. In the moment this guy with you to express, however, Michael was not confused and rudely responded, which surprised him a lot. Thus, Mike's displeasure at the man going at him with a sharp stream of attack. Michael had noticed it earlier. Remembering much from his past life, he turned around sharply and launched an attack much faster and more powerful than his opponent's. Michael quickly ran beside his opponent, and at her crushing blow, with one swing he managed to gain the upper hand. Immediately afterward, he went for a walk around the city, and felt a strong sense of nostalgia for his native place. However, his body was very weak, so he lost all his progress. The strength he had also lost, and now it was harder to live. Turning back, Michael notices the women running from the huge chickens that are chasing them. The people on the streets also didn't understand what was going on. They didn't discuss among themselves that it might be a new monster attack, quite sudden. Journalists arrived on the scene and began filming all that was happening is to stitch eyewitnesses to publish in the newspapers. And of course, the suspect turned out to be our hero Michael. His case has already been turned over to local law enforcement. In the moment, the local emperor is reported that there is a large onslaught of monsters in the city. This greatly frightens him, and he asks to resume guarding. By this point, Michael had already broken into a battle with the monsters and defeated many of them, thus saving the humans. The people around them were greatly surprised, and at the same time very happy that someone had come to their aid at such a difficult moment. At this moment, Michael didn't care about listening to nice words at all. He was tired, and the monsters weren't getting smaller. The desire to save people and get the upper hand over these monsters motivated him to fight on, so he kept fighting. It was very difficult for him at the moment, as the monsters were getting bigger and bigger, and he was only getting weaker. At a point, the monsters even began to overtake Michael in strength. His armor wasn't working. They had the ability to fight for a long time yet. This state of affairs did not suit our hero. Using the techniques of his sword, he decided to add power and energy. However, in a moment he noticed that not far away from him was that very gate, and another world where all those monsters were coming out of. Then, technical rockets flew overhead, and a series of huge explosions erupted right where the monsters were. A minute after that, the royal army arrived on the scene and began to help Michaels with what they needed to fight the monsters. This caused great joy to our hero, as at last he does not have to fight alone and put his life on the line. A local emperor also showed up on the scene and immediately began thanking Michael for saving people's lives. After the emperor noticed Michael's excellent suit and began to ask him where to buy the same lovely suit. The emperor also asked Michael to tell what his name was and what union he was in, but Michael had no union members. Michael realizes the problem and starts shouting all over the place that he's new and hasn't had a chance to join a union yet. One of the emperor's aides in Michael is some kind of assassin and is going to announce it to everyone so everyone knows. The emperor sees great benefit and potential in Michael, which is why he shuts the aide's mouth to hide the truth. Michael also decides to take advantage of his new opportunities. He throws dozens of business cards in the air, saying he left his number there. Using knowledge from his past life, Michael realizes that the newcomers with tremendous powers are very profitable people. He knows well that professional union pickers will immediately appeal to him and offer a considerable sum. Michael is about to walk forward and immediately hears the emperor say behind him that he would like to talk to Michael. Our hero realizes what's up. He turns around and immediately talks about how he's going to demand a lot of money. Michael then jumps on his sword, pushes up, and talks about how they can easily find it if they want to. However, here is the emperor. Looking at the business card, sees there an advertisement of a completely different person, which surprises him greatly. Michael realizes he's made a mistake. He goes back in, takes the business cards, gives out new ones, and flies off into the air on his sword. A short time later, Michael arrived in a new city where he immediately went to chase down phone bills to keep his number active. After paying for his services, Michael leaves somewhere in the building, but at the entrance, two large men stop him abruptly, preventing him from going inside. However, at that moment, a man in a blue suit named Ron arrives at the building and informs him that he has paid for Michael's entrance. At this point, a girl in a yellow suit appears and suggests to Michael, join the yellow union, drop the blue. Michael didn't really pay much attention to these people, but the outside guys around him were very surprised to see such attention from the leaders to Michael. Michael continued to head straight for the gate, with 9 leaders of all the unions already showing up behind him. After a while in the hall began a general meeting, the main star of which, of course, was our hero. He was the center of attention. The Blue Union, of course, insisted on taking Michael for themselves, for they were the first to arrive on the scene. The leader of the Yellow Union was against such a decision because there is no rule that controls such a transfer of members. While the union leaders were deciding who would get Michael, our hero at this point just sat and ate. In the moment, our hero was approached by a manager from a white union who began to suggest joining them. Immediately afterward, Michael addressed all the union leaders and declared the blue leader to leave the place first. This damaged the reputation of the Blue Union, but the Yellow Union at this point was very happy about what Michael had done. Michael then addressed the rest of the union leaders and said that if you want to sign with him, you have to be sincere. The first to take the floor were the white union men, who immediately said they were willing to pay $3 million. Mayakovsky to look at their manager and ask about why I don't immediately present such large sums. Do they really have so few people, he thought. As Michael pondered how he should best handle this situation, the doors of the room abruptly began to open. Black union men showed up on the premises and immediately said they were willing to pay 3 times as much. This immediately surprised and even upset the rest of the unions, who realized that now they have nothing to catch here. The Purple Union immediately noticed that the leader of the Black Union very rarely comes to pick up a person in person. Negotiations have yet to begin, but the Black Union guards have taken notice, risking an attack in their direction. It turned out to be a toothpick attack into an energized attack that was immediately repelled, but believe in everyone's shock. The initiator of this attack turned out to be our hero Micah, who apologized, saying that his hand just shook. At such a moment, the Black Union guards couldn't just stand still. They began to attack Michael. Everyone around them was in wild shock, and Michael, using his usual wands, was able to fight back all the same and stay in one piece. This angered the Black Union guards, and they began to use their common techniques, directing the attack at Michael. The combined attack began to head straight for Michael, but he was not confused. He grabbed his stick and was ready to fight back. Michael didn't miscalculate his choice of strategy, and it allowed him to get rid of his opponents from the reckoning by beating them off with a regular stick. The Black Union guards and their leader had the distinct feeling that Michael was perfectly familiar with their attacks and techniques. Michael himself at this moment just stood in one place, not even thinking of doing anything. He smiled and looked into the eyes of his opponents. In the moment, Anfisa intervened in the battle. She is the Letitia of the White Union, and stated that she was going to take the jersey, so she would not let him be killed. Michael appreciated such actions from the outside, immediately realizing that her union was pretty decent for him. The leader of the Black Union has announced that he is not quitting and has no further intention of fighting for Michael. Before he left, without turning his head, the Black Union leader said he would remember Michael once and for all. Meanwhile, the White Union leader approaches Michael. She asks him to find a secluded place in order to sign the contract. Michael in turn ignores these words. He yells across the room about whether someone is going to offer him more money. Everyone around him immediately starts offering Michael much larger sums than the White Union, whereupon the leader raises the stakes. And the White Union leader says that in addition to the money, she's also offering 1% of the Union's share. It is this proposal our hero expected, immediately after which he agrees and offers to talk elsewhere about signing the contract. Meanwhile, the leader of the Black Palace instructs his aides to find out all possible information about Michael. Michael, in one of the offices, explains to the leader of the White Palace exactly what and how he has a story to tell at a certain epiphany. The White Palace leader says that having studied the past, she didn't notice anything outstanding at all, much less a professional teacher. Michael replies that he won't answer the various sides of the questions, as they aren't close enough for him to tell it yet. It stresses T-shirt Me Too that after talking to the operator, he'll have to communicate with the usual union leaders. In reviewing the contract, Michael talks about how he would like to make minor edits to it, and it is important to him. Our hero asks for a change in his work schedule, and talks about wanting a guarantee for the funds so that everything is fair. Michael also talks about demanding more of his share and power if the unions expand. In response, the White Palace leader says that this is completely absurd, and such overstatements cannot be made. After hearing these words, Michael talks about how he can just go to another union and get it all. In response, Anfisa talks about how no one from the union will go and allocate such high authority to Michael. Anfisa starts sucking up to Michael in order for him to agree to her terms, and they are favorable to her. Michael realizes that if he didn't know her past, he would have agreed to all of this by now. However, he knows her past. He declares that so be it. In return for her kindness, he would be willing to back off a little on his terms. Michael is asking to keep his terms at the reduced schedule. They say it is very important to him. Anfisa agrees to these terms. They say goodbye and split up, going in different directions, Michael flying out on his sword. However, as soon as Michael leaves, Anfisa feels the full sense that she has just been tricked and led around. Meanwhile, forgetting the story takes us to an emergency manager named Brock. Footage of what happened in the settlement where Mycom was and how our hero fought back against the monsters is brought to the director's desk. Brock immediately asks his aides if the recruits came in to get into any unions. The assistant director of the Department of Emergency Management states that no one has come in for months. Meanwhile, the events of the story take us to a gym where a crowd of teenagers are practicing martial arts. One of them asks the controllers if the instruments are broken, as they have not been showing low scores lately. However, their dialogue is interrupted by the fact that the hero Michael appears in the room, asking where he can get a uniform. The manageress is greatly surprised to see Michael in front of her, where she has already reported on how strong and honest he is. She also says she saw his battles this morning through the camera and it really impressed her. Immediately afterward, the manageress, named Sophia, offers Michael to go forward. Now she will explain how everything works. Sophia talks about the different levels in learning all kinds of people, and that it's not just those who study martial arts who learn. Sophia clearly and lucidly explains the fact of how the distribution of energy in the human body is divided, and how to train them. Michael informs Sophia that he is simply well physically developed, and no attributes unfortunately. Then Sophia directs Michael straight to one of the machines, testing his strength. Michael decides to invest not to the fullest, so as not to freak out. Micah immediately gets into a very cool pose to circulate energy, which mesmerizes everyone around her. As soon as Michael decided to use his powers, a huge aura immediately appears for the man, with tremendous energy. Before he strikes, Michael recalls various techniques from a book he received from the Emperor in a past life. And after that, but still strikes directly into the machine. Using the hold, there is a huge explosion of energy. The charge of energy was so great that it went beyond the palace they were in, rushing into the air. The aura of energy that launched Mike was so great that even Brock noticed it while in his office. Already after the blow, the realization of how much tremendous power he had just used then stunned everyone around him. Michael is pissed off that his plan has gone awry, but here is Sophia claiming that he has passed the martial arts master test. Sophia declares that all conditions have been met successfully, and Michael can come over and take the gift he received. With a rather sad look, however, Michael does pick up his martial arts master's license. After that, he climbs a special mechanism in order to gain more energy to become even stronger. With the help of this apparatus, Michael enters the life force world of the illusory apparatus. Michael is in a specially created world and everyone else is watching him through cameras. Now he is also being tested. This is where Mykov differs from his first opponent, the Sky Monsters, who will be his enemy in this challenge. Initially, our hero stuck to the plan to say hello to the monster. However, in response, the monster began to attack Michael. Micah starts screaming that this monster is Sky much stronger than himself, which is why he would like to be released. An hour has passed since then. But Michael is still in that dimension, and the instrument monitor has malfunctioned. Principal Brooke appears in the room. He has immediately explained everything that happened, and it surprises him. Suddenly, Brooke states that there was a ranking error, but Sophia retorts that she was accurately ranking him with the machine. Sophia immediately starts blaming herself. She talks about how in the event of Michael's death, she will still be there to blame. However, the moment the technical department was able to connect, they saw everything in blood, lying on the ground. All bloody Mike was right inside the dragon. He was screaming about how he would definitely defeat this monster even if he had to die himself. Sophia began to walk straight towards the car in order to shut it off quicker. However, she began to crack up in the moment. Immediately afterward, Michael came out of the machine, was completely unharmed and in a pretty strong condition. Michael myself couldn't figure out why I came out, why the peak isn't a monster, and why it's still in that container. Our hero sharply noticed that he is missing several limbs. However, Nikki Require Healing restores them. Immediately afterward, the flask bursts. Michael flies forward and falls right on top of Sophia. He's all unharmed. Michael immediately starts yelling at her, saying that he demands to get an explanation for the whole situation that happened. Michael is immediately approached by a friend. He introduces himself to us and tells us that he is the one in charge of this core. He then politely informs him that someone will handle compensation for Michael and also asks to come with him to the office. Michael immediately recognizes a friend if he realizes that he is not at all happy to see such a person here. Informs him that in order to get certified as a martial arts master, he needs to know everything that happened in space and in Michael's past. Michael states that he is happy to tell everything, however, he is a little nauseous right now and wanted to go to bed. Brooke's aides inform Michael that the inspection of his weapons and costumes is complete, and he can pick them up. Michael leaves, and Brooke and her assistants begin to chat about what they should do with the equipment that has broken down. Michael's girlfriend somewhere, contemplating getting a trailer to take him in. He should remember that. He meets some people and asks them to let him pass, showing a temporary martial arts master certificate. The guards say it's best not to go in such places, especially for beginners who don't know much yet. The guards ask Michael to show his ID again, and talk about how they don't want to look for his stuff. Our hero responds by talking about how he doesn't have much time, as he is now in your building, and he can't waste time. I reference the Union first. The guards decide to open the door after all, no questions asked, and give the order to the hand monster to open the gate. Our hero immediately notices that in addition to monsters, the opening of the door is also engaged in ordinary people, the poorest class. Watching the faces of these guards, Michael realizes that they will be the first opponents of the new monsters when the Great Gate opens. But what worried our hero even more was that on the way, his pocket got torn, and all his food and money started to fall out. However, I noticed this problem immediately, but only when I had traveled quite a distance. Michael immediately blames the grocery store clerk for the problem. He was most likely the one who noticed the problem and kept quiet. At the point, Michael was caught up in a new problem, namely the appearance of huge dragons that began to block the way forward. Michael is in an already very tired state, and now he is clearly not ready for such a powerful battle. Abruptly, a monster guard appears next to him, who immediately blocks the dragons, thus saving our hero. This all scares the crap out of Michael, but he's happy to be saved. If he collects in dragons, he shouldn't be at all. These gates first appeared as much as 5 years ago, and became momentarily similar, so became a regular problem for an empty palace. The monsters that come from this portal have managed to destroy a fifth of the continent, but have not progressed further. The MANHUA continent came up with a plan, the essence of which was to create an artificial trap where monsters would gather. However, the monsters were not so stupid. They were able to recognize the trap and attack the other side, leading to tragedy. The continent was only a short distance away from complete collapse, but a man had appeared who could change the situation. This man turned out to be Emperor Ronald, who gathered a huge army and fought back against all the monsters. Our hero Michael, meanwhile, finds the most important area on the maps and realizes he should get it before anyone else. Michael set up camp and began to think about what land he should buy back so he could get rich quicker. So Michael already knew about what buildings the future would build. It wasn't hard for him to determine the best place and what to place. In a moment, the hero heard the language of the magnetic continent, decided to return to check what was going on. He saw a group of people and some little girl in the center being bullied and headed straight there. These people immediately saw a tattoo of a red wolf. Red wolf is a group engaged in robbery and robbery. However, more attention our hero caused the girl in the center, namely the huge magnetic energy that surrounded her. In just one instant, this girl, named Jessica, managed to create herself in a larger size. Immediately after that, she began to use this magic, covering everything around her, closing the energy space. However, the people from the Red Wolf faction, it wasn't that they were greatly surprised, rather even outraged. Our hero Michael just sat and watched everything, waiting to see what would happen next. But in a moment, he got tired of just sitting still. He jumped down from the top and intervened in this fight. Michael knew these thugs, so simply taking pity was no longer an option, and began to deliver life-critical blows. In just a couple of moments, our hero Michael finds himself right beside his goal, moving towards a girl named Jessica. Only one enemy remains in Michael's path, but he demolishes him with just one blow, making his way without enemies. Jessica, in turn, is greatly pleased with such a gift from Michael. She thanks him for his help. However, our hero responds by bringing up the sword of Kesha, saying that he knows about her being the greatest witch. Michael immediately recalls an incident that reset 8 years ago. Back then, apparently Jessica appeared over the settlement and burned it down. At that moment, our hero Michael felt as helpless as possible. He even thought that very soon he would die. Witch Jessica was right in the heavens. The entire sky around her was covered in a maroon color, resembling blood. She herself, in turn, time after time, directed huge attacks of energy straight down, hitting everything in her path. However, it didn't turn out to be as bad as she thought it would be. For the moment Emperor Ronald appeared, it was a strong showing. That day, our hero Michael was very happy to see him, and immediately offered $1 billion for his rescue. Michael was crying like a baby. He was pointing his finger up and begging Ronaldo to save him and help him get away from that witch. The conditions of a whole $1 billion caused Ronald to want to help Mike, and he volunteered to fight the witch. The fire that Jessica created that night burned for 3 more days and 3 nights, not stopping at all, and burned down the entire capital city. During that incident, hundreds of masters and dozens of supreme martial artists died against one witch. Part of our hero's business burned to the ground. He is forever remembered by this witch, because of whom everything happened. However, now our hero Michael couldn't understand at all why a powerful witch was just some kid asking for help. In the moment Jessica got bigger, she stated that she was willing to always be with Michael for saving her. For a while, Michael just stood there looking at her. He couldn't figure out if she was really the girl who had burned down the whole capital. Michael turned around and started to walk away. He stated that he wasn't interested in children at all, so she was free to go. In his head, our hero immediately realized that she was just trying to cast a straight eye to gain trust. Now our hero knew where she lived. He devised a plan by which he could eliminate her by the hands of the Union. Time went forward. Our hero returned to his camp and began to roast a pig in order to have supper. As he prepared for his pleasant dinner, he didn't even notice Jessica watching him from behind the rock. And while Jessica kept her eyes on Michael, she herself didn't look, for the wolf that had already gotten close behind her. Smelling the wolf's aura, our hero immediately headed over there. He killed it in 1 second and looked at Jessica. Michael immediately turned to her rudely. He told me to get out, then sent the side with one swing. Immediately afterward, he began roasting new wolves and immediately gobbling them up, celebrating his victory today. Michael was genuinely enjoying his dinner and giving himself tips on how to better handle the sauce, but Jessica was still watching him. The wolf situation happened again. Michael rescued Jessica again and started gobbling up another newfound wolf. For the next 4 hours, the situation was repeated every 10 minutes. At one point, Michael got tired of it. He asked Jessica to stop. However, in response, she only cried and said that she was very hungry, which is why she was following Michael. Although with difficulty, but Michael decides to help her. He herrings himself and feeds her fresh meat, which of course she likes very much. Our hero decides that in such a situation, it would be a smart decision to get her to dialogue and starts asking different questions. Jessica tries to answer T-shirt, but abruptly starts choking on her food as she didn't expect such questions. Afterward, Jessica reveals that one day she found a strange magical formation and abruptly headed towards it. Tells that after she entered this field, she was transported to another place and the field itself was gone. Immediately afterwards, some unknown men hunted her down and as a result, she went on the run. Jessica also describes the main man in the Red Dragon Gang. He was the one who gave the orders related to her kidnapping. Michael at this point just sat and listened. He couldn't believe such a silly story Jessica was telling. For a while, our hero listens to Jessica, however, afterward asks her what her future plans are. And in return, Jessica asks Michael if he has a way to help and get back to her home. But the answer, Michael declares that Jessica is unlikely to be able to return home, much to her shock. Jessica asks Michael if he can stay with him until he finds a solution to his problem. She creates an adult image and asks about whether Michael would mind if she followed him for a while longer. Michael refuses to do it for free, after which Jessica says that she has no money at all. Michael looks at her and realizes that he looks now very pathetic, so much so that even he feels sorry for her. As the events of the story move forward, Jessica finds herself once again being held captive, tied to some tree right in the wasteland. This place, the very leader of the Red Dragons arrived, who immediately took Jessica for himself and began to lead her away. Along the way, the leaders of the Red Dragons talks about how it's just a harsh reality, and he had the same thing. His men discuss among themselves that their leader has gone into brainwashing mode, but they don't want to interfere. Along the way, they also discuss the roast meat that was recently stolen from our hero. However, in a moment and calm conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a mob of monsters. The Red Dragon men immediately began to resist. They opened fire and their bows. That's not helping at all. That's how the monsters got the upper hand in this battle anyway, over them. One of the monsters attacked directly at the leader of the Red Squad, but a certain ray of light abruptly burst into the fight and saved him. As expected, this man turned out to be our hero Michael, who instantly saved Jessica and repelled the squad's attack. Immediately afterward, Jessica, along with Michael, headed to their camp and began grilling their new prey. Michael decided to make a new dish from what he had managed to catch. However, it was inedible in Jessica's opinion. Time was ticking forward. The big hour of the night Michael had spent transferring some of his energy, and he was pretty exhausted. Jessica herself, on the other hand, is expected to feel perfectly fine, as she's full of energized energy right now. Michael turned to her and asked her to stop fooling around, also mentioning that the Red Wolf people had been waiting for them for a while. Our hero Michael began to show Jessica a map with markers. On it, he marked all the places where there could be treasure. Afterward, Michael abruptly stood up and announced that Jessica was going on a treasure hunt with him. However, it's a fun send-off into adventure, worrying over the fact that T-shirt gets a call from Anfisa. Michael states that he did not expect such a call this early in the day, and also asked how the creation of the contract was going. Anfisa replies that Michael could at least say hello to her since they haven't seen each other for 2 whole days. However, in response, Michael says he has a lot of things to do. Afterward, Anfisa informs him that Michael will get the contract, but will have to take an entrance test. Anfisa immediately declares that no one has previously passed this test, but such a favorable contract, no one else has not received such a favorable contract. Michael immediately agrees, but says that if he wins, the entire contract bonus is doubled. Their call was made and Michael and Jessica headed out. All the way Jessica demanded to be given some goodies. Thus together they reached the nearest town, where Maikov took pity and bought her some delicious candy. Michael and Jessica made their way to the White Union building, where they were already greeted at the entrance by Anfisa, along with an assistant. Jessica immediately told Michael that Anfisa doesn't like him all that much because she looks very strange. However, Michael disagreed with Jessica's opinion. He stated that Anfisa looks pretty good if Tabla Train will look the same. Anfisa's entire line went straight to Michael and asked about the cute baby with him. Michael introduced Jessica as his sister and said right off the bat that he was willing to sell her if anything happened. Michael's words caused a big shock to Anfisa. She can't understand at all how he can sell his sister. In response, Michael asked Anfisa not to fill her head with thoughts about it, and he suggested that she go straight to the test. Anfisa approached Michael, stating that he should talk to the White Union president before taking the test. Michael was not very happy with this news because he knew that the president of the White Labor Union was the 7th richest man in the country. Immediately afterward, Michael was directed to the house, where this old man was already waiting for him, who was very glad to see him. Michael decided to play along with the old man and show the same intense joy, saying eternally that he was glad to see him. The old man immediately began to talk about hearing the new contract terms. They surprised him very much. In the moment the old man abruptly attacks our hero, he starts threatening them and talking about how they know everything now. The old man talks about how he's going to destroy Michael in order to find out what he's really capable of. In his thoughts, our hero realizes that it is their truth will not be easy. The old man is very strong. However, here, Michael has gotten much stronger now too, and knows a lot of techniques to block his punches. It was enough for the Jersey only once to take the dragonfly's hands firmly in his own, as he immediately said he was ready to sign a new contract. The old man also says that if he passes all 3 tests, he will get 300 million. Our hero realizes that doing business with this old man is much more pleasant than with Anfisa, because he knows a lot about his business. Anfisa's aide says that in his opinion the old man is overdoing the sums, already quite old. But Anfisa states that she trusts her father, which is why she will not challenge the decision but accept it. The whole group walks through the corridors of the lab. Jessica keeps wondering if the people who are in the capsules are edible. Michael also watched carefully Forgot Labs. I understand why the White Union is growing so much. After all, they have great technology. Meanwhile, our hero is brought to the testing ground. I have already gathered a huge audience to watch him. Anfisa turns to Mile and tells him that there are battlesuits here and they should try them out to reduce the damage. Michael asks about who his opponent is, and immediately a man shows up saying he's on his way. This man turns out to be Carl. He is on the first team of the White Union and is very powerful. Michael is quite surprised when he sees him. His face reminds him of something very much. Our hero immediately recalls reading about this fellow in the newspapers, for he is represented as the supreme student of the White Union art. Michael's opponent approached our hero and caustically began to ask if it was him, asking for 60 million. A kid named Carl, who is Michael's opponent, started talking about how he can't even break his fingers, let alone beat him. In response, Michael asked Carl, holding out his finger, and if he could break it, he would call him a puppy. This made Carl very angry, and he began to insult Michael. However, Grandpa intervened and stopped the argument. Carl did not argue with Grandpa and the others. He just went forward, and our hero did not even understand what happened. Afterward, the old man turned to Michael, asking that he not provoke Carl anymore, as he was already quite nervous. Meanwhile, people who are watching the fight are starting to report to start very soon. Anfisa turns to Michael and offers him to use the Union's weapon, but he refuses, saying he will use his own. And in response, Carl starts threatening our hero, talking about how his chains will rip all of Michael's skin right now. Anfisa notices that Michael has pulled out the very sword she saw in the video. She realizes that it is most likely a very powerful weapon. However, Michael unexpectedly puts his guns in Jessica's hands and asks her to wait on the sidelines. This brings a look of shock to Anfisa's face. She was not expecting Michael to make this particular decision, for it is incomprehensible to her. Michael starts waving his arms around and talking about how in this fight, his fists are enough for him. This behavior of our hero also surprises the old man. He says that the kid on Michael is not bad at all. Meanwhile, at the battle location, something very interesting begins because everyone around you is talking about it. The guys who came to watch are discussing amongst themselves how many rounds Mikikov can last before he falls. One of the guys talks about how the fight is going to be very interesting because he's seen Michael's high artifact weapons. The squad captain talks about the fight officially starting, however, he doesn't believe Michael's victory is close. Immediately after his words, Carl snaps out of his seat and begins attacking our hero with massed attacks. Michael, meanwhile, doesn't realize what strategy his opponent has chosen, since he expected him to attack directly. Beams of blue energy abruptly begin to appear around Michael. Everything around him is covered in it, and Carl threatens that Michael is about to die. Time after time, Carl flies by Mike, and each time repeats that he will break every bone in his body, and will definitely win. The guys watching the fight are pretty surprised that Michael hasn't given up yet when he sees that kind of speed. The squad leader talks about how requiring speed is one of Carl's most important parts with which he fights. The squad captain starts to leave. He tells everyone that the outcome of this fight is clear to him, as Michael won't be able to keep up at this rate. The guys in the squad don't even try to argue with the captain, they just accept his point of view and agree. Between themselves, they discuss the fact that at this rate, even they wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure against Carl. However, in a moment, abruptly, the expression on his face changes a lot because the entire battle scheme changed in an instant. What happened was that with just one punch, Michael sent Carl face first into the ground with just one attack. Michael stood over Carl, who is lying on the ground, and talks about being ready to take on his next enemies. Such a great fight, he surprised not only the guys from the squad, the old man with Anfisa, who also stand in shock. Michael starts to leave. She places already arrived medical squad in order to save Carl's life. The old man shouted right down the hallway and spoke about the squad of the third team, along with the leader, getting ready for battle. However, here was the leader of the squad. Taking these words with doubt, he approached Carl and decided to see for himself what had happened. His face changed to wild horror when he saw the injured Carl, just one blow away from Michael. Anfisa turns around and turns to Michael and asks about whether he's accidentally injured. Michael retorts that he's fine. He only scratched his fist a little, nothing more. The old man thanks Michael, saying that if he hadn't reduced the force of the blow, Carl would likely have died. Michael responded with a smile, saying that he had thought of everything in advance, and Carl with his speed even helped him. Anfisa watches the cute dialogue between the old man and Michael, noticing that they are totally on the same page. Meanwhile, the head of the third squad, named Luise, turns to Anfisa, asking how she's feeling. Anfisa turns to Luise and says that she will be giving a test to a newcomer, so she asks to refrain. Luise talks about all the time. He signed an equally important contract, so now realizes the importance of the events. Luise then heads straight to Michael and greets him sweetly, and tells him it's good to see him in the Union. Michael asks Luise about the murderous aura in the camp, much to Luise's surprise. In response, Luise only laughs. He asks Michael not to overestimate himself, especially his price. Luise laughs. He talks about how he signed a much bigger contract than Michael back in the day, and he's pretty strong. Afterward, Luise starts to walk away, talking about how such audacity could come out sideways for Michael. Anfisa tells Michael that if he can beat Luise, he'll sign a contract twice as big, which is very lucrative. Luise, go forward. Here's part of their dialogue, and when he hears such large sums, he gets scared. Luise and Michael's fight begins. Anfisa immediately asks about the weapon he will use. Michael refuses to give it up. Nafisa asks Luise if he will use a weapon, or if he will also fight with his fists. With great shame in his eyes, Luise starts yelling about how he urgently needs a big sword and a big shield. A second after that, right in front of his face, two of his aides appear in just an instant. After their appearance, strange things start to happen, as ice appears all around and Luise's head becomes like a wolf's. With great surprise in his eyes, Michael notices that he has messed up a strange technique. Luise has managed to turn into a wolf. One of Luise's aides turned into a human shield, also using reincarnation techniques herself. And Luise's second mate, just like that himself was not left out, he used the technique of reincarnating into a living sword. While in a wolf costume with a living sword and shield, one stated that this was his primary weapon. Michael, of course, didn't like that sort of thing. He started talking about the commander using the two masters of the arts for his own purposes now. The old man did not agree with our hero. He began to talk about the fact that this is the most common weapon of the captain of the third squad. At this point, Michael realized that the old man was just mocking him, and also called him pretty mean. Luise, meanwhile, turning to Michael, began to talk about how managing two martial arts masters was already a measure of strength. Anfisa jumped into the dialogue. She started telling Michaela that this is unfortunately the truth that can't be argued with. However, this didn't please Michael at all, and that screamed that it was still a hoax and began to call out to Jessica. Jessica, meanwhile, stood beside the old man. She stared menacingly ahead, yet she could understand nothing at all. Michael in the moment grabbed Jessica, lifted her up, held his sword up to her, and began shouting that he was ready for battle. When asked by Anfisa what he was doing, Michael began to say that he was doing exactly what Luise had done. To motivate Jessica to fight, Michael started talking about how Luise was a wolf that could be roasted. In response, Luise started laughing and talking about how if that's what it took, he'd just kill the two of them, and that was it. The old man, in turn, started talking about how using a shorter person was a very creative idea. After that, he officially announced the start of the test, and Michael's opponent went off the rails. With the attacks that he ran forward, however, Michael reached forward Jessica, leave her indeed as a human shield. The guys on the squad started talking about how Jessica is still a kid and could very well get hurt. The fight was in full swing. Anfisa was telling the old man that she couldn't believe such synchronized work between the kid and Michael. The old man stated that it still surprised him as much himself. He hadn't expected Michael to be such a ruthless man. The old man began to explain that Michael had a huge grudge against someone that he was willing to sacrifice his life for. The fight, meanwhile, has been very tense, with neither side having taken the top position yet. The sides time after time have attacked each other, but no one has been able to get the upper hand yet. Luise yelled at Michael, saying that using a child as a shield was just disgusting to him. In response, Michael, with a funny face, talked about how he wasn't the one who needed to tell him that, and he was doing the same. Looking into his opponent's face, Michael began to remember that he remembered him in a past life and remembered his cloudy moment. More specifically, Michael remembers well that this guy was suspended from his job for visiting a brothel. Meanwhile, Luise's shield and sword began to complain that their strength was running low and the transformation would soon end. Well, the response, well, funny evil, is that it's a regular riot and he's not going to go along with them, so they should shut up. Luise made the decision to attack much more quickly and powerfully, so he began to take Michael by surprise. At one point, Michael noticed a huge blow coming at him from his opponent, using energy and his fist. As it turned out, Luise landed a pretty strong, powerful punch right into Michael's body, bringing him to a critical state. One of Luise's aides at that moment turned back into a human and snatched Jessica out of Michael's arms. At this moment, Anfisa, along with the old man, just stood staring, but everything going on, unable to believe what was happening. Luise, meanwhile, was twirling the vanity in his hands and talking about how their plan had worked out just fine. He looked at Michael, who had been tossed aside, and wondered if that blow had been enough to win. One of Luise's aides assured him that the baby was fine and they had him, so it was okay to proceed. However, while they were fighting and discussing things, Michael abruptly snapped out of his seat, heading towards Luise out of sheer anger. Michael grabbed his sword and began to wield faster, very powerful, intense attacks straight at Luise. Luise began to complain, and to say that he would not last that long, for it was not long before the reincarnation would be over. Luise had given orders to his aide to take Michael's weapon, which is exactly what happened. Immediately after that, Luise, using the power of his fist and energy, directed his attack again towards Michael. Thus the Ovnov sent him away, the weapon, no longer belonging to Michael, so no longer in his hands. However, Michael wasn't confused. He threw a leg kick at his opponent and headed towards Luise. The hero Michael tries to save Jessica, but it turns out to be difficult because Luise applies so-and-so from above and prevents him. Surprisingly for everyone, Luise manages to land a punch directly at Michael, with which he sends him sideways, and says that Luise's strength needs to be recognized and understood, as he's quite a trained and experienced soldier already. Each Michael, meanwhile, is trying to pull himself together, regain his composure, and prepare a new plan of attack. Michael manages to take by surprise one of Luise's aides and starts attacking him to take his weapon. Luise is back in the fight. He tries to protect his friends, his sword and his shield, but it turns out very badly. This is all being watched all the while by the very guys who have gathered to watch the fight. They're pretty surprised at what's going on. Luise tries to strike with his ball straight at Michael, but Michael easily dodges it. Well, greatly displeased with such a huge agility of Michael, so he throws does not teach, however, and it so goes by. Luise turns into a human. He attacks from behind and tries to trap our hero. Next to him, right with the ball in his hands, Luise appears, already about to attack and hit hard. However, our hero Michael informs Liz that he has lost because his weapon attacked on its own, without orders. The guys from the squad who watch the fight come to utter horror. They just can't believe that their captain lost. Luise doesn't stop there, so Micah makes the decision to call Jessica and gives her orders. And in a couple of seconds, all the guys around come kid step. They obviously did not expect such an outcome of events. I was surprised even the old man. He thought that his life, then already a lot, however, and such a thing he did not expect. They were all amazed that instant's little Jessica turned into a large girl. It was left to fight like a true martial artist using the 2 attributes of fire. After just one attack, everything around was covered in flames. The ground began to explode, and everyone stood in shock. Anfisa and the old man watched it all from the sidelines. They also found it hard to believe it all. They hoped that Luise was okay. In a moment began to behave like a real beast. He started lunging at Michael and promising to destroy him. Anfisa was in shock in all her 25 years. She had never seen a fight as strong and unusual as today. All the men from Luise's squad were also in shock. They had wholeheartedly supported their captain, but were now greatly surprised. In this battle, the old man intervened. With one finger, he stopped Luise's attack and told him not to overdo it. The old man used a huge roll-tay that began to open up everything around him. He asked Luise to stop. In order to bring him to his senses, the old man used a lot of strength and sent Luise sideways, straight into the stone. Luise lost mind. The old man started praising Michael, talking about how he was very strong, and his little sister surprised everyone a lot. The old man also began offering Michael's next fight 30 million, and also asked if he wanted to rest. Michael became about the fact that he will only go to the next fight when you know who he's going to fight. After that, the old man began to take off his shirt and talk about how the next opponent for Michael would be him. With a terrible aura of fire, the old man began to suggest that Michael should start this fight with you right now, with 300 million at stake. The huge figure woke Michael up. He picked up the sword in his hands and immediately began to agree to such a fight. However, Jessica intervened. She started stopping Michael and asking if he really wanted to fight. Michael realizes that Jessica is indeed right, but he finds it hard to believe that a future witch would worry about anyone. Jessica started to ask for food, and then Michael realized what was going on and sent her kicking to the side. The old man's body swelled up a lot, and he started talking about how the rest of the captains were on a mission, so the finals would be with him. The old man began to tell Michael that he was very much looking forward to this fight, because he hadn't met a strong opponent in a long time. Michael is only through there complaining. He started talking about how it's already a complete mockery, and he's only a rookie. Michael abruptly declined the fight. He stated that he didn't want the extra money and he was taking his own. However, the old man wanted to fight our hero very badly. He started pestering him and asking for at least a couple minutes of combat. Anfisa grabbed the old man and began to drive the side, telling him to stop embarrassing himself already. Some time passed. The old man began to apologize to our hero, explaining that he was a little unwell. Michael was eating meat with Jessica and talking about how he had already forgotten the situation. The old man called this marvelous news and also suggested to Michael proceed to sign the contract. Anfisa stated that she did not know which team Michael wanted to join. However, the first team was the best. In response, Michael stated rather bluntly that he didn't want to be on any team at all. Jessica responded by saying that their teams have a pretty friendly atmosphere and eternal mutual support. Michael all turned, began to ponder the fact that being part of the team might come out to his advantage in terms of strength. Michael approached the old man with Anfisa and asked there if it was true that they had been missing a captain lately. About the old man's reply, he said that although the commander of the third squad had behaved badly, but that was no reason to remove him. Michael immediately started apologizing. He started saying that he didn't mean to replace this captain at all. Michael then stated that he was proposing to create a new 7th Union team. Anfisa began to argue with Michael. She immediately said that for a new team, you need new people. Immediately, Anfisa offered to make Jessica part of his squad and give her the same reward as him. The old man began to explain to Michael that creating a new team is a time-consuming process, quite difficult. However, their dialogue was interrupted. One of the assistants ran into the room, saying that he had urgent news. The aide reported that on the east side, new monsters not seen before were found. The old man, together with Anfisa, took the tablet in their hands and began to study the new information that came in. The new monsters turned out to be huge balls of slime that chained people to them. After this news, the old man immediately appointed Michael captain of the 7th team and gave him his first assignment. The old man made the decision to send Michael, along with Jessica, to the eastern border. Anfisa took Michael to the warehouse. Anfisa began to explain that this was where Michael would be able to find the weapons he needed, since it was the main warehouse of their union. Michael tried to pretend he was interested, but it was hard to do. He clearly didn't care. Afterward, Anfisa directed Michael to the transport, stating that the engineers were training him to use it. The engineers showed Michael a special airplane designed for distant senders. It is very comfortable and practical. The engineers hadn't even had a chance to explain to Michael how to use it yet, but he had already jumped in and taken off. Immediately afterward, with great speed, Michael flew out of the palace straight towards the eastern border. Anfisa was discussing with the engineers the possible chances of Michael successfully reaching the location and accomplishing the mission. Meanwhile, on the eastern border, the guards are deciding amongst themselves how best to handle the situation. However, everything changes when they don't see the plane in the sky, realizing that help is just around the corner. Out of this plane, out comes our hero Michael. He immediately shows his credentials, saying he's the new leader of the 7th Squadron. Our hero is immediately approached by the guards. They offer him to take a special amulet that will allow him to pass the gate. This time, our hero will not be alone, because using the earpiece with her will contact the technical room under the direction of Anfisa. First of all, Anfisa explains to our hero the principle of operation of portals, as well as the fact that you will be waiting for him behind them. Anfisa asks our hero about the situation in the city, and he immediately states that it is a complete mess. Meanwhile, some of the guards still continue to fight and battle against the monsters that are left. With his eyes all around him, Michael relays to Anfisa the information that some kind of green liquid is consuming people. Michael also reports that there are captains from other unions here who look just awful. Anfisa immediately apologizes for the fact that they didn't warn Michael about it beforehand, and also talks about the fact that they will pay him for it. Michael notices some girl up ahead. He sees a sword in her hands, and asks her to lend him the sword for a short while. In response, the girl talks about how it was outrageous of the White Union to show up here unarmed. Michael asks her not to put so much importance on a simple sword, and talks about the fact that behind her back too is a big slug. Michael studies the situation quite in detail. However, Jessica simply suggests burning the whole place down. Our hero tries to enter the battle with these monsters. Using special techniques and powder, he tries to achieve results. However, lo and behold, the monsters give Michael a pretty big fight back, so he has to use more force. Squad leaders from other unions also do not stand still. They fight against the slugs, helping each other. While in the meantime, our hero along with Jessica have fun with slugs as toys. Afterward, Michael collects a bag of some slugs to send to headquarters for inspection and says the mission is over. However, leaders of other squads from other unions stop Michael and say they would like to talk to him. Our hero in response began to shout and say that he will not give them anything, and this robbery will not succeed. Michael starts yelling that he will not tolerate any abuse of himself and also threatens the state guard. One of the commanders started telling Michael that these monsters burst in one hit and they only need a couple samples. The man then began to ask Michael to get a couple samples for them, saying it was very important. In response, Michael declares that this is not the way to do it, and says that he will not approve any such requests. Afterward, Michael abruptly pulls out the slugs and talks about how he'll be selling them for $500,000 apiece. This is all heard by Anfisa with the help of an earpiece, who immediately realizes that something is clearly going wrong. Anfisa starts yelling at Michael and talking about how the price of these monsters could be much higher. You can't sell them now. Michael counts the money and talks about how there's no more use for these masters than a regular sale. However, their dialogue is interrupted. Anfisa has received an alert that a huge monster has appeared on the border. It turned out to be true. Right next to the magic crystal, a huge caterpillar appeared. The captain of the squads, along with his assistants, froze in place in amazement. They did not understand what was happening. Our hero Michael was also in shock. He saw this monster as both a prophet and a huge problem. He immediately managed to recognize this monster's great Snail Queen, a rather strong opponent. One of the captains of the other squads called for help from his partner, a fat kid with swords. Then, captain of the squad, he gave orders to his partner to become a human shield and go into battle. Using special attributes, a kid named Franklin was able to start rebuilding walls in under a minute. Franklin played an important role on defense, however he was unable to completely stop the influx of monsters. Literally alone, lone poor Franklin fighting against a squad of monsters as a shield. At the same time, the snail monster continued to rampage, causing even more problems for everyone around. Everything that was going on was closely watched by our hero Michael. He made sure that the situation did not worsen. The very leader of the squad began to suggest that they all go outside the barrier and wait for reinforcements. Anfisa started trying to contact Michael. She also tried to order them to get him to leave the battlefield. However, even the hero was in no hurry to leave. Together with Jessica, he came up with some plan and followed it. The other leaders began to criticize Michael. They talked about how if he didn't leave with them now, everyone would die. Everyone around them began to leave, but there was still only one Franklin left bravely holding the defenses. The squad leaders also began to leave, lastly telling Mike that there would have to be one out there alone looking for salvation. Michael began to ask about the fact that would they really abandon Franklin since he was the only one holding up the defense. However, the outside leader of the squad stated that this was exactly what he would not do, then crossed the barrier. However, no sooner had he completely left the dimension than he noticed that part of his leg was left on the other side. Michael created this as revenge for Franklin and later gave Jessica orders to burn his leg. Using her phone, Anfisa asked Michael to find a place safe and wait for backup, but Jessica had already started covering everything in flames. Anfisa reported by phone that other unions had already used the flame, but it did not help at all. But our hero Michael had fun jumping in and talking about how comparing their fire to Jessica's fire is just silly. Michael went straight to the center of the battle in order to rescue Franklin from it, which he does now. Jessica's entire turn created a flame attack for the snail and directed the entire energy charge directly at the enemies. Michael continued to save Franklin and asked him to use his shield to fend off the attack. However, by this point, the caterpillar was already almost completely covered in flames. Meanwhile, the leaders of the squads that escaped are trying to help each other to escape. Jessica's operation, meanwhile, was nearing its end. Denise had managed to create a flame that enveloped everything around her. Due to this high temperature, Anfisa lost contact with Michael and Jessica. Now she doesn't know where they are. Anfisa's aides began reporting that various information indicated that the barrier's boundaries had been erased. It surprised her. She couldn't believe that Michael had any chance of successfully completing the mission. Michael began to ask Jessica to create a no-fire zone, but she said she hadn't learned how to do that yet. Hearing this answer, Michael grabbed Franklin, and together they went forward, away from the fire. All together, our guys started to run in the first direction they could. Despite everything around them, they just wanted to leave the area of fire. In order to survive, they had to crawl inside the throat of a huge snail, for that was the only place where there was no fire. However, lo and behold, there was also a problem waiting for them inside, namely intestinal bacteria. Michael reported that unfortunately they would have to defeat them in order to advance. Then, pulling out his sword, Michael began to fight against the bacteria, defeating one by one. Franklin, meanwhile, was taking a bath and slimy, talking about how Michael was very smart. Michael sweetly addressed him and stated that if he wanted to learn something, he could come to him in the future. Franklin thanked T-Shirt, and they shook hands together in honor of such a strong friendship. Jessica began to complain that she was hungry. However, Michael said that slime was best not to eat. Jessica started yelling even louder, saying that they urgently needed to figure out where to get food from. Michael realizes that he won't be able to hold out much longer under her screams, so it's worth it to think of something. Our hero began to hold out a special teleportation amulet to Jessica, but she paid no attention. Started talking about what could be done with it, but Jessica didn't listen and poured fire on the amulet. This behavior made Michael wildly angry. He hadn't expected this from Jessica and was getting very angry. He began to scold her severely, their development that he would now feed her the same slime all day long. However, their dialogue was interrupted by Franklin, who reported finding something up ahead. It turned out to be a special portal, specifically a magical gateway located in the intestines. Michael started walking straight towards the magic stone. He was surprised to see such a thing in such a place. Jessica was the most excited about it. She started running straight for the portal, happy that she was finally going to eat now. Without thinking at all, she scattered and jumped straight into the portal, then tried to start the teleportation process. Franklin started talking about how she was probably going into the unknown world, and Michael realized the same thing. After a couple seconds, Jessica returned from the portal. She began to hold her arms out in front of her and beckoned Franklin and Michael over to her. They decided to take a chance and trust Jessica, immediately after which they went into the portal and ended up in the wasteland. Michael immediately began to contemplate the benefits to combining a snail with a portal to these lands. The heroes themselves were also very much interested in the question of how these gates were created. After a couple seconds, Michael and the others spotted some people, though they were more zombies than humans. Learned about these monsters and also their vulnerabilities. Hit singly, they are very weak, but more often than not, they act cohesively. Our hero, on a pair of Jessica with Franklin, began to observe what is happening and come up with a plan for action. Jessica turned to Michael and stated that she remembered the place. She said that the lair of the red dragons was very close by. Meanwhile, somewhere in the mountains and terrain, there is a clash between two people who can't resolve, between themselves, some issues. One of them is a guy named William. He talks about how he needs help right away, as backup. He leaves a few men with him nearby, sending the rest to find help for reinforcements. Using stealth techniques, our hero passes through walls and into their lair, where he begins to follow. Watching them, our hero realizes how they managed to slip away from everyone earlier by using a portal. William, meanwhile, scolds his subordinates, talking about how they shouldn't have released monsters of such enormous size. Overhearing absolutely all their dialogue, our hero managed to learn that the portal was stolen by a snail, after which it ate it. It turned out that the spiritual ruler of their group had died, and now William was the spiritual ruler, so he was in charge. Michael abruptly lashed out and took one of the zombies right out of their cave, telling it that he was saving it. Michael also informed this zombie that he had an offer for him, but the terms would be interesting. The zombie started begging to be let go, and talking about how he didn't want to become a slave. However, in a moment, the zombie spotted that very same bracelet right in Michael's outfit, right after which it went silent. Michael began trying to find his team, but was greatly surprised when he saw Franklin in the stone. But most of all, our hero was interested in the question of where Jessica was now. In the meantime, she climbed into some cave and began to study and look at all the things that were there. In the moment, it was as if she began to see different people around her standing in utter despair in this cave. However, this whole session was interrupted as William showed up, who was happy to see that Jessica was back. She, in turn, immediately sensing his presence, turned around sharply with fire in her eyes. She didn't even have time to twitch before she received a leg kick right into her body, then flew into the cave. William turned to her and spoke of not being able to use his art in this cave, which is not strong enough. To back up his words, William points to the side where dozens of martial artists are sitting handcuffed. In the meantime, however, the events of the story take us right into the White Union, into the main palace. An old man comes there. He turns to Anfisa and asks about how her command over Squad 7 is going. Jessica honestly admits that she hasn't been able to get in touch with him for a long time, and all the searches have been in vain. The old man asked Anfisa not to worry, stating that Michael wouldn't die so easily, at least not until he got his money. In the moment, a man with red hair enters the room with them, talking about how he too hopes Michael survives. That person turned out to be the president of the Red Union, a man named Arnold. At our place, the old man was both pleased and surprised to see Arnold, and he turned to him and asked him what he could do to help now. Arnold began to talk about how Michael's actions caused his nephew to lose his leg in the portal. After that, with the eyes of a demon, he turned to the old man and asked for an explanation about this situation. The old man retorted that their captain had not yet returned, so it was best to wait for him and hear all sides' versions. Arnold and his men began to talk about how it was unlikely that Micah would return, because the borders had been erased and monsters remained on the other side. Also by Arnold talking about how it was the White Union violating the western frontier that ruined the whole expedition. After that, the Eagle asked for compensation of 10 billion, which greatly surprised the old man because he was not ready to pay so much. Arnold also informed the old man that Michael had gone to fight alone against an army of red wolves. Arnold said he hoped for understanding from white labor unions and compensation after stating they were leaving. Anfisa began to tell the old man that if they didn't come out on the money, their reputation would be severely damaged. The old man assured Anfisa that it would be another 6 months before the next re-election, so there was no need to worry. Meanwhile, our hero Michael is very angry that Jessica didn't listen to him and went off on her own. Franklin talks about how he also felt very sorry for her, but he couldn't stop her. Michaelu puts the zombie in Franklin's hands and begins to leave, saying he'll be back soon. After Michael left, enemies showed up around, but Franklin turned to stone, thus not giving himself and the zombies any offense. Michael held the zombie inside, the way Michael told him to. He's already disobeyed Jessica once, and he doesn't want to fail again. However, lo and behold, the zombie continued to rampage. It didn't like being in the stone at all. Baby Zombie tells him that in their clan, memories go from patriarchy to patriarchy, so he should hurry. And this process of memory transfer happens with the help of a special purple bracelet that Michael has. Meanwhile, our hero Michael arrived at some cave, along the way ruining several enemies. Michael starts eavesdropping on the dialogue of local people, and he hears William's voice telling something to his subordinates. Speaking to the orphans, Villamy says that thanks to the Union's Krasno, they are receiving many supplies. William grabs another one of the guys, starts choking him, and talks about how he's going to fight for the good of the Red Union afterward, and states that after this battle, everyone won't be sold on the black market. However, in a moment, he senses some sort of strong aura, and abruptly turns around to see who is behind it. This man turned out to be our hero Michael. With a rather emotionless look in his eyes, he stood and watched. William began to talk about how it was a waste of time for Michael to come here just by himself, because now he couldn't escape. However, lo and behold, Michael didn't pay attention to William's words at all. He headed over to Jessica and asked about William hitting her. With tears in her eyes, Jessica began to nod, clearly making it clear what he was hitting her with. William began to address Michael again, repeating the fact that now he would not get out of here alive. Michael turned to William and stated that he would now pay with his life for what he had done. William didn't see it as a real threat. He stood still and laughed with his finger at Michael, not taking him seriously. He started threatening Michael with force and talking about how they are the second most powerful among all of them. With a cold stare, Michael retorted that not everyone liked to talk as much as William did. William continued to babble. He threatened Michael that in each of these caves is a warehouse with ammunition and paraphernalia. After William stated that this weapon is pretty scary, and he is ready to demonstrate to Michael its full power. Demonstrating his power, William turned to him and asked about whether he was willing to send him to hell. William didn't shy away from Michael. He talked about how they wanted to use their powers to open portals to other worlds. While Michael dealt with William, the guards, Franklin was taken into custody, wrapped in rope. Meanwhile, William, along with Michael and all the prisoners, began to leave the prison and the caves. Michael gave him water and then added that it was time afterward to get back at him for attacking Jessica. However, here, William didn't understand anything at all. He couldn't think close to what Michael had come up with. William's aide reported that all who drink this water begin to speak only the truth. William came in great surprise at the information, and Michael stood only behind him and smiled. Afterward, with joy on his face, Michael began to talk about how he had quickly prepared this potion, and endlessly praised this drink, saying that it was his personal development. When William created everything, he started yelling and talking about how Michael had gone against God, and that's not the way to do it. A second after that, between Michael and the movie, a real fight ensued, not for life but for death. Michael didn't stand for it. He attacked back, using special techniques to block the flow of energy. Our hero realized that his opponent is quite a strong man, so he attacked time after time without stopping. After a couple minutes was over, Michael had already overpowered William as well as his men around him. Our hero took out his purple bracelet, after which pointed it right in Jessica's direction. However, it's unclear what for. Afterward, Michael turned to Jessica and stated that he would help her get revenge, whatever it took. However, the dialogue is interrupted as Michael notices William has gotten to his feet, weapon in hand. William started yelling at Michael and clearly getting ready to shoot right now. Michael realized that there wasn't much time left and the bullet was already flying, so he applied a strong energy charge. Michael took the ball from the clockworker's hands, then dialed it right into William's body, chaining him to the wall that way. Our hero started talking about how no matter how strong a martial artist is, he can still be killed, even with a kitchen knife. But William managed to hit Michael, so he fell to the ground with bloody wounds, much to Jessica's surprise. Seeing all this, William's aide ordered his men to take up arms and go to William's defense. The soldiers of the Red Dragon army began running around the cave, looking for weapons and ammunition to begin the operation. Our guys can't help Michael at all, as his heart is partially punctured. There are no professional medics among them. Michael, meanwhile, is in a terrible state. He can barely speak anymore. Jessica can't hold back the tears. She cries hard, and she can't understand why, and that's it. Meanwhile, you're on the Red Dragon. Already started the operation to take out Michael. Got the weapons. Jessica became very angry. She started yelling about sending everyone to hell, and her eyes were covered in fire. Franklin appears in the cave. With his huge body and strength, he tries to save his friend, our hero Michael. Jessica, meanwhile, tries to restore our hero Michael's powers by transferring fire energy to him. Michael, meanwhile, loses consciousness. He is in another space, somewhere in his mind. Opposite him is a huge man levitating in space with a head the shape of a clock. Michael begins to think that in front of him is the god himself, but it turns out not to be so, because this man is waving his head negatively. Our hero asks the man directly who he is, and the man replies that he is Michael's father. In a moment, our hero did have an epiphany. He abruptly heard a very familiar voice he had heard before. The voice caused Michael's energy to flow and aggression, so he attacked the man next to him. How it began to beat him, to beg, time after time, for his speedy death, right here and now. This man's body has begun to disappear, and he himself only says that it is only a piece of his soul. Michael began yelling and asking where the man was now, however he gave no answer. Michael began to shout again and asked if his father could answer any questions or if he would remain silent. With a devilish face, Michael's father started talking about things that might tell him how to survive. Such a phrase surprised our hero very much. He was ready to hear a lot, but obviously not this. He began to talk about being here now, in the gap of time, should he be on the edge of death. For some reason, at that very moment, our hero remembered about the time bracelet. Michael began to ask his father about knowing everything that happened to him before he got here. Michael's father began to talk about how the easiest way to survive, for him now, was to answer the question. After which Michael's father added that one day of life will equal as much as 100 million, and these terms are important to remember. Michael started to ask where he could get such money. His father said that he would have to rob even to live. Michael's father also gave him a full 5 minutes of his life, extra, which was very generous of him. Meanwhile, the men from the Red Dragon faction continued to conduct gunfire on our guys. Franklin's strongest defense, however, saved everyone, for it held up the armor-resistant dome. Meanwhile, our hero comes to a realization that makes Jessica and Franklin, and the rest of the guys around them, very happy. On the arm of our hero, a counter appeared, following which there are only 4 minutes left to live. Michael realizes that he only has 2 minutes to live, so it's worth taking action, and breaks out the buyout. Michael becomes Luffy's special fighting stance, which allows him to withstand a greater load and become stronger. Using his powers, Michael moves pretty fast, as Luffy's stance is the best at allowing for acceleration. Our hero turned to his friends and asked them afterward what they would do if they had only 2 minutes to live. Just 2 minutes. Jessica immediately stated that she would try to eat all of the last 2 minutes. Franklin immediately stated that he would have found a more comfortable place to lie down and rested. Michael began to fight alone against all the enemies in order to defeat them and survive faster. He was unleashing the most powerful attacks, amassing huge amounts of energy, and preparing for the strongest concrete. Our hero starts pumping himself up right in battle, using the demonic tools he learned earlier. In a past life, he was very rich, and he had a book with the strongest powers he had learned. Now is exactly the time when Michael, genuinely pleased with what he bought in a past life, some trinket. Michael realizes that it is of these people that his life is now worth money, and he truly hates them. So he decides that he will steal from them all the money available to prolong his life longer. Michael grudgingly remarks that he only has a minute to live, so he decides, send to the vault. Our hero forces Franklin to use his powers and explosives to make a fast track. Franklin talks about the fact that although they now have, however, in the vault door, still in place. Jessica realizes what you were doing was of high importance, so she decides to help and creates a stream of flames. Our hero is very pleased with her. He is happy and talks about giving her goodies today in return for such help. However, as well as understands this, that Mom urgently needs to wait before all the money inside is burned. Our hero Michael decides to ask Franklin to make money vaults out of his armor. Michael looks at his time. I notice with shock that it hasn't increased at all. It's disconcerting. He reflects on the fact that he will most likely have to gobble up money to make it count. Franklin began to gather the matter, while Jessica, meanwhile, was busily asking Michael for food. Our hero realized that the only way to know this was to try to eat the money. The Red Dragon guys started asking to feel sorry for them, and talked forever about how Michael had all the money now. Michael had yet to gobble up the money, and abruptly noticed that the time had increased. This pleased him. He had 250 days of life added to his life, which meant there were 250 billion right behind him. The people of the zombie tribe began to greet Michael and also call him their new master. The zombies started calling Michael their prophet and guide, referring to him as a young gentleman. However, here, not at all expecting to hear such a thing, he stood there in shock, and not at all aware of what was happening around him right now. Michael asked for more details, but the zombies stated that they had no further information. Our hero immediately realized that there is something wrong here, and most likely these zombies, there are still a lot of secrets. Jessica began to turn to Michael and talk about how hungry she was, and asked him to give her some noodles. Michael gave the order to capture all the bandits from the Golden Dragon's crew and send them to the dogs for food. Momentarily, Michael had a collapse of strength. This was due to the fact that he was using too much energy. While Michael lay unconscious, the zombies began to carry out the order. They transported the gold through the portal to the designated location. Evening came and all our boys went out to eat, to which Jessica was most pleased. Michael, in turn, was always busy cooking, as Jessica endlessly asked him for more. The zombies reported that all the material had been moved, and with it, the money and ammunition. The zombie even managed to get a portal out of the snail's body, using a tray to carry it to another location. Mykoff began to sit and contemplate what they should do with the portal, as it was very large. Also, our hero had a very interesting idea, namely to roast or stew a huge snail. You helped Michael understand what the snail was saying as they understood its language. Michael stated that he would let her live, only on the condition that she would be his guardian in this place. Zombies translated Michael's snail's answer, so of course agreed, but such conditions from our hero. Michael listened intently to the zombies, and in the meantime, he fed Jessica, and since she couldn't get enough to eat, our hero fiercely and resolutely raised his sword and declared that now this territory will be called by his name. However, right during this, some unknown energy appeared right in the sky and caused everyone around to pay attention. With energy, Michael began to look directly into the charging beam and suddenly noticed a familiar silhouette there. It turned out to be Emperor Donald. Michael recognized him immediately, as he clearly wouldn't have mistaken him for anyone else in his life. No sooner did it reach the ground, however, the beam simply disappeared, unaccounted for, as if it had never existed along with Donald. Michael and Jessica were quite surprised. They didn't expect to see this, and didn't know how to react to such a thing. The zombies immediately reported that send him know where these people have gone, because they are suspicious. But our hero stopped the zombies, stating that there is no need for this, so these people have long been in another dimension. Michael is surprised by the enormous power that Donald already has, and will soon have even more. Our hero addressed the zombies. He stated that he wanted nothing to do with them and the host, and stated that he would assign them rewards and salaries. The zombies were not happy about this, however, to argue with Michael. They simply could not, so they politely agreed. Michael advised that he will be gone for a while, however. When he returns, he will work hard to develop this village. From that moment on, the events of our story go forward, taking us right into the White Union Palace. And there's litigation going on within the Union, so it's the fault of the White Union that the others lost some territory. The girl from the Black Union, and altogether suggest that Michael should be punished the way they punished being 100 people at once. The old man himself, a White Union leader, stands in rather great amazement, making no normal comment. And afterward, he points to the side, to Michael's memorial, hinting at his death, which surprises everyone around him. Our hero, meanwhile, can't get in touch with HQ on Fiza, as they're most likely at his funeral. People in the Union squads can't understand why Michael gets so much respect and others don't. The old man starts to pretend like he's crying, and speaks posthumously both words for Michael and his passing life. People from the squads, gathered here and pretending to be sad, quip telling not real stories Michael's death. However, even such a hilarious scene of Michael's death doesn't evoke much feeling from the people around him. The old man cries again and goes on forever about how Michael was a wonderful man, even though he lived so little. The leader of the Black Labor Union started talking about Michael committing a misdemeanor that deserved death. However, since Michael had already died, the punishment was done, which is why it surprised the other union leaders. But even with all that, the people around continued to discuss the situation without finding anything wrong with it. A black union leader says it will cause a huge loss in the rankings for white unions. The old man began to talk about how his heart was already weak, and such news he might not be able to bear at all. Black union leader Anna Speak says she's been appointed to watchdog the unions and it's up to her to decide. The old man began to repeat that his heart was already weak, so he might not be able to bear further dialogue. Anfisa began to talk about the fact that father, it became bad, so they will explain later, but now he needs to help. The black union leader started to leave. Anfisa said she would give an answer a little later, and it would be sharp. Also before the move, black union leader Anna said that the red union also plans to intervene. People from other unions leave, and our old man lights a cigarette, talks about believing Michael's dinner. Meanwhile, our hero Michael goes to the portal in order to return to his homeland. However, as it turned out, all this time Michael had been watched by the leader of the first Red Union squad, named Johnny. The leader of the Red Union, named Rox, is there with them, and he is going to control everything. The leader of the Red Union, named Rox, stated that their main goal will be realized very soon. Meanwhile, our hero begins to build relationships with the workers and help them with various mechanisms. Michael walked back to the ground and immediately met before him the same priest who had met him at the beginning of his journey. And he confides in the priest all those people he saved, much to the shock of the priest and his assistant. He with his friends back in the regular world, Franklin informed him that he had to go to the Red Union and report back. Our hero asked Franklin before leaving to remember their promises and said he would come back for him sooner or later. Before Franklin left, our hero announced that very soon the Red Union would be gone, as it was too much of a nuisance. Michael went straight to the Yellow Union and started chatting with the locals about making a union. Julia, the leader of the Yellow Union, stated that monsters do indeed bring her also herself trouble. Our hero Michael, together with Michael and Jessica, began to behave very cheerfully and offer the former in order to enter into confidence. Julia's month of assistance immediately pointed out the fact that Michael and his friends sing very hilariously, well, sweetly. Some time comes, night falls, and everyone goes to bed. However, Michael follows Jessica, who does not go to bed. Jessica started talking about how she hadn't had enough to eat all day, so she wanted to eat some more. Michael didn't believe Jessica and started shaking her to shake something off her, looking suspicious. In the moment, right out of Jessica's clothes, a special stone she found in the cave falls out. However, Jessica had no desire to part with her stone. She grabbed it and began to run forward. Jessica started telling Michael that this stone could get her home, and it was important to her. Michael, hi bed. I turn to the joysticks indicating that he has some questions for her. Our hero holds out candy and talks about what he'll give in return for the good he's been doing right now. He attempted to start a dialogue with Jessica. However, she was laying down food the whole time and didn't reply anything at all. Michael asked if Jessica wanted to eat more after she used her transformation and transmutation. Jessica talks about how she can use powers far greater than she has now, but it takes a lot of energy to do so. Immediately after saying those words, she turns into a bigger version of herself, saying that she's ready to prove her words. Jessica tells Michael what you in your native land, she is called a witch, and a very powerful one at that. She also talks about her stomach and energy reserves being restored, even tree bark and bugs. Michael listens attentively to Jessica, but he is greatly surprised by what she tells him. He did not expect to hear such a thing. Our hero turns his back and talks about how he doesn't need anything from Jessica except the usual help, so she can take it easy. He leaves, and before he leaves, he tells Jessica about going to bed early tomorrow. There's a lot to do. Before Michael leaves, Jessica turns to him and asks about whether she can go home. You and I have our own view. Michael replies that he doesn't know that, however the odds are always in favor of it. The next day, Michael walks right into the office of the Green Union, their leader Laura, and starts discussing various matters with him, shocking him. He yells at Laura and talks about how he cares a lot about the cooperation of the Green Union as much as they do with him. A Green Union leader named Laura yells at Michael and talks about how cooperating with someone who is supposedly dead is horrible for him. Laura also points the finger at Julia, the yellow union leader who's already in cahoots with Michael. Julia talks about how she's partnering with Michael for a reason, and it's a huge benefit, her personal desire. Deputy Laura approaches him and says that there may indeed be a benefit to this union, something to think about. He explains what enter Michael's business, and his corrupt one, is quite profitable for everyone around him. Lord looks right at Michael and realizes he's building a monopoly here, but also realizes it's a pretty lucrative one. Michael turns to Laura and talks about how if he won't talk, he'll have to talk to the Red Wolves. Even the hero is about to leave, however, Laura stops him and tells him not to jump to conclusions. He suggests Michael stay here, not for long, while he thinks things through and makes a decision. Some time passes, and Laura's assistant brings the contract. Together with Michael, they decide that this is where the collaboration will begin. Our hero gives the contract to his assistant and asks her to handle all legal matters while he is busy. Michael announces that all the non-unions are being shipped out, and this causes a huge shock to everyone around him. Most surprising to Laura, he realizes that Michael is going to make a fortune from his sales. A small amount of time passes, and our hero arrives at Solar, the leader of the Blue Union. Michael cooked a burger for him and informed him that it would be the most delicious meal of Solar's life. Our hero tried hard. Using ketchup, he created the initials of the Blue Union right on the burger. It wasn't hard for Mike because in his previous life, when he was bored, he often did the cooking. He once even had a fish cup, which is given out for the coolest dishes cooked in their town. All solemnity, however, came to an abrupt end. The view from above announced Jessica on the horizon, flying straight at Burger. What was obvious was that she was full of desire to eat him right now, thus depriving Solar of food. Michael screamed and begged the Blue Union leader to start eating before Jessica attacked and took the food. In fact, Solar himself was indeed very hungry, the flavor of the meat in this burger beckoning him. However, he was also kept in mind that this could be a huge trap in Michael against him. Julia decided to try a bit of sauce from the burger, and that alone was enough for her to be in awe of the flavor. The leader of the Green Union, as well, decided to try it himself, and also experienced wild amazement. Michael realized that if this continued, everyone would get the gist of what was happening too soon, so it was to restore them. He began to address Solar directly and talk about what's in this burger and why it's so delicious. The events of the story translate to Roxa, who is now exploring the wasteland lands and all that has happened there. Roxa's assistant reports that there was a very powerful man around who was responsible for defeating the demonic monster. Roxanne's second mate turned his attention to the portal and pointed with his hand directly at the rock where the magical stone with the portal was. Upon noticing him, OC immediately gave the order. A third team would go there and find out everything they could. Meanwhile, our hero Michael is being discussed by his partners, their immediate business strategy. When Solar sees the map, he is very much surprised that Michael wants to cover the entire continent with his sails. The leader of the Green Union is happy about this because he sees a potential profit for himself, which he is very happy about. And of all things, Green Union leaders are surprised by the kind of starvation marketing Michael chooses, because it's to counteract the norms. While eating nuts, Michael tells his new partner about the plan they won't use in their business strategy. The leader at this time signed contracts, and also try to calculate whether the profits that can get cooperation. In the end, a contract is signed between Michael and the leader of the Blue Union to cooperate. After signing all the securities, Mykoff and his team and other leaders leave the house of the Blue Palace and the unions. The events of the story take us to the leader of the Cinnamon Union, who is currently in training with his men. People nearby are crying, so today on their property, huge monsters broke all the houses. A brown union leader named Jan stated that they were just doing their job and meant no harm. However, the people around here are not at all comforted by this, as they have nothing to pay for housing and their old houses are gone. In the same location is Franklin, who is currently honing his martial arts skills. The union's Brown puts Mykoff examples there, explaining that he trains very hard and accomplishes a lot. In the moment, right beside the Brown Union leader, our hero Michael appears, along with a Jessica on his head. The Cinnamon Union leader is greatly surprised when he sees Michael and Jessica and asks them who they are. Along with Michael arrived the rest of the labor leaders with whom Michael had developed a partnership. The hero begins to reach out to Ian and offers him cooperation, saying that she is very profitable. Here, however, Jana gets very angry in response and talks about Michael breaking the boundary barrier, for which he will pay. Julia, as Michael's first partner, decides to step in for him and protect him from the hands of Ian. In response, Ian said that Michael was wanted by the government, so Julia had better step aside. However, lo and behold, Julia refuses. Jana makes a point of saying that she is leaving him no choice, so he will act drastically. Julia is even glad that Jana is acting so aggressively and states that she is ready for anything. Between Julie Ian interjected Michael. He stopped with his hands and informed that not losing, not winning this conflict, but will not help at all. Meanwhile, Edward, along with his men, walks the magical corridors, surveying the area. In one of the vessels, Edward caught a glimpse of some man, or rather kisses him, as if he had not yet been born. Edward was alerted to the fact that the red stone in his hand led to this very spot, and it was very strange. Edward used the energy to try to look inside and see who was in there. He put his hand to one of the vessels, using the energy to try and connect with it to make a connection. In a moment, the body that was in the vessel began to move, which surprised everyone around him, including Edward. Temporarily, a squad of zombies with guns in their hands were guarding the area, trying to fight them off from the Red Union men. The squad leaders from the Red Union chatted among themselves about how their men were no longer capable of defeating even an army of zombies. They noticed the problem of having zombie hands and miss already, hence there is someone who supplies it to them. One of the squad leaders is angry that these zombies can use guns so easily in a situation like this. People from the Red Union, disguised as ordinary workers, to infiltrate the tower where the portal is magical. However, lo and behold, they fail to do anything with the portal. This angers the squad leader. He calls them scum and gets angry. The squad leader, named Zeus, gets off his seat and starts attacking, saying that he will now take over the case. Zombies are well aware that fighting against the commander will be very difficult, so they decide to escape through the portal. The commander laughs lightly. Zeus talking about how such fearful opponents, it's hard to call them enemies. Zeus steps in front of the portal and says that he will now destroy their nest. The zombies, meanwhile, successfully leave the place and move on to another, thus leaving themselves safe. Local experts are communicating that even if a new attack comes, the towers will most likely increase the use of attributes themselves. The combat troops, meanwhile, are very excited about the fact that they managed to get their hands on the latest weapons and equipment. Chesky Ball, meanwhile, begins to build up energy, attracting more and more of the hour to himself, using attributes. Our hero, meanwhile, is still trying to stop the fight between Ian and Julie from happening. Ian is amazed beyond belief that Michael was able to stop his fire just with his bare hands. Ian brags about his neck and begins to contemplate the fact that it's likely that Michael also owns, most likely, an attribute of fire. Our hero knows that Ian is very afraid of the attribute of fire, since Jessica burned down his union in the future. In a moment, Franklin noticed Michael. He was very happy about it since they hadn't seen each other in about a week. Michael started waving to his friend Franklin. This caused surprise on Ian's face. He didn't know that his men knew Michael. However, as Michael's men gathered around, they began to recount some not-so-great information about the latest happenings in the world. The economic situation worsened. Michael noticed through the timer that the number of days was less because of this. One of Michael's aides began to suggest to him to drink the lands in the east in order to increase his influence. Our hero realized that the idea is really good, but there is no money for it now, so he decided to postpone it. Ian started yelling at Michael and saying that their dialogue wasn't over and he would like to continue. He started calling his manager and asking which financial agency his projects had been assigned to. However, the drunks were only informed that they are now taking a big loss, so it's not a big deal. Ian is told the name of the new real estate manager over the phone. He says it out loud, after which he is greatly surprised. He says it out loud. Our hero Mykov immediately responds, and this greatly surprises John. Clutching his cell phone with his hands in anger, he just smashes it to pieces without any words. Ian is angry with Michael and talks about paying compensation to all the locals. The locals ask Ian not to zlitz, and also talk about how Michael is now their local boss, so they don't demand anything. However, I'm still angry and yelling at Michael, since he solved in one day everything I spent 6 months solving. Ian asks Michael to compensate all the residents, after all scones and tea, but our hero thinks such compensation is idiotic. In response, Ian states that if Michael doesn't do it, then he'll just burn Michael alive. Hearing such words, Jessica becomes very angry. Her eyes are covered with fire, and she makes it clear that she has great powers. In just an instant, Jessica had created levels far greater than Ian's, proving that she was many times stronger. This startled and amazed Ian. He was very much angry but also frightened. Such immense power in a girl. Micah begins to talk about how he may have done the wrong thing. However, Ian takes on too much. Our hero calls compensation only a temporary solution and suggests finding a better method than this. He points out the union in the hay and talks about how they need people far more than the rest of us. He then points to the leader of the Green Union, saying that they need people on the team to move the market forward, and adds that the Yellow Union team needs people with good looks, making it clear that everyone around them also needs people. Michael asks Ian to treat everyone else more caringly and more honestly instead of thinking only of himself. Meanwhile, some person contacts Edward and between them they discuss the general situation. Edward is informed that one of the elders has been killed, so they should retreat immediately. Edward's aide states that it's not surprising to die at that age, so he doesn't see anything surprising here. In response, Edward asks the assistant not to be clever and asks him to try to live to that age first. Meanwhile, Edward receives a call from the Black Union, informing him that the man previously thought to be Artyom has been found alive. The stories send us straight to Anfisa, who is happily running around the room, looking for the old man, her father. However, he in turn hides and reads secretly magazines that Anfisa has forbidden to read. Anfisa declares that she's going to get someone back, but doesn't specify who, and starts to walk away. In response, the old Brit 10M that if Michael is gone for such a long time, it means he has a solid plan, no need to worry. Hearing this, Anfisa returns and talks about how the Red Union has already learned Michael's location and will most likely send him there. Well, here's the old man, once again asking Anfisa not to worry about Michael, talking about how he's been through a lot already and can handle it. However, right at that moment, then people from other unions show up. They claim that the old man is taking on too much. Leaders of other unions begin to hold the Dragonflyer accountable for all actions, including Michael's. This greatly surprises the old man. He stands in one place. He doesn't know what to do. He is quite distracted. Seeing that the old man is silent, they start pointing guns at him and after that threaten him with everything. A third-party union leader declares that the old man doesn't obey the laws at all, so he'd better walk with them. The events of our story carry over to Jan. Our hero teaches Jan how to control the energies within himself. Michael pointed to Franklin and said that only after learning special techniques did he become many times stronger. Michael also suggested that if workers used special techniques, construction would quickly accelerate. However, in the moment, the union leaders get a message on their phone that they should apprehend Michael, so he is a criminal. Michael begins to guess what happened and suspects that he missed the Izveda during his machinations. Julia was the first to address Michael, stating that he should run as fast and as far away as possible. The leader of the Green Union said that as long as Michael was in hiding, he would take care of everything with the rest of them. Michael asks what this is about, and in response, the Blue Union leader shows him the bounty on his head and the wanted man. This time, Michael finally realizes what has happened. It shocks him greatly and surprises him to the point of creepiness. Julia started begging Michael to run away quickly, counteract the city. He's 100% facing the death penalty. She also emphasizes the fact that they haven't grabbed Michael yet to decide favorable terms, so he should speed up. The answer to that, Michael asks Yuli if it is true that he is now giving them far more resources and opportunities than the Red Union. After these words, the leader of the Green Union began to tell Michael that they do not measure everything by money. Michael started talking about how even though he's a speculator, he's still an honest man. After that, our hero approached the leaders and began to hold out his hands, saying that he can no longer escape. Also asked them to take care of his people after you died, which caused sadness to them. Also stated that if Jessica is fed every day, she will drive herself very well. No problems at all. Upon hearing such words, the men Michael saved began to riot and asked to be released. Julia takes Jessica away and talks about how if Michael gets torn to pieces, she won't take care of him anyway. The carriage, along with Anfisa the old man, went to the desert lands instead of the location of the government. The old man asked to the white-haired leader where they were going, and the latter replied that they had changed course directly to permanent land. After that, all the carriages with horses began to cross the boundary of the portal to move to another dimension. Most of all, Anfisa was surprised by such changes. She had not expected this to happen. The borders of another dimension, our hero was met by a man from the Black Union who was waiting for them. There were other important people there who started laughing with the White Union and calling it the completed unions. The old man was silent at this time, but Anfisa strongly rebelled against it, for she did not like such ideas at all. That's where our hero Michael, who came there with the rest of the union leaders, ended up. Knockout, handcuffs were on his hands. Not only was he unwalkable, Jessica as herself from below saw Michael, the leader of the Black Labor Union, gave orders for him to be arrested immediately. However, Anfisa blocked the road and said that the White Union was ready to give an explanation for the whole situation. Julia also sided with Michael, stating that they were willing to shoulder all financial costs. The hero turned to the head of all 9 unions and asked him how long this circus would go on. The judge then issued a statement accusing both Michael and the Red Union of various things, started shouting loudly that everyone associated with the Red Union would pay for it because he broke the rules for everyone in the group. Though the old man rather sadly began to walk straight towards Michael, which surprised him quite a bit. The old man started yelling at Michael and talking about how he had embezzled himself, public money, which was something you couldn't do. However, their dialogue was interrupted. The whole process was interfered by an unknown soldier and started killing everyone. In a moment, a Black Union man will, in a single movement of his hand, destroy a Red Union soldier. People from the Black Union were surprised at how warriors from the northern regions and easily mastered martial arts. Michael, on the other hand, had a different interest. He couldn't understand what people from the northern regions were even doing here. A few more fighters appeared, just standing still, waiting for others to act and receive attacks in their direction. As far as the towers tried to hit, no attack could pass through them, as if they were made of stone. The Red Union aide noticed the situation. He immediately started calling Edward. Edward, the Red Union leader, was fighting against the monsters, but seeing the aide's call, he decided to answer it. Edward's aide reported that they had been uncovered. This shocked the Red Union leader. Our hero began to realize the essence of what was happening. He sharpened his attention energies and began to draw his sword. Edward tried to call him, but his assistant abruptly disappeared and the connection dropped. The moment the connection returned, however, the phone's camera, pointing at the aide, in third person. Turns out, with his own van, Michael ran the body of Deputy Edward and through the camera showed him this. It's from the Black Union, decided to stop everything that was going on, then pounced on the opponents. However, their plan was disrupted as a huge torrent of fire appeared around them, demolishing everything in its path. After that, Franklin intervened in the situation. He swelled to a huge size, and with his body, he protected Mike. Franklin blocked all the punches our hero had, after which he began to apologize. One of the secret warriors used a strong attack, directing a stream of energy directly towards Franklin. At this point, Jessica stepped in and created a huge amount of fire all over the field of what was happening. She realized that Franklin couldn't handle the secret wars, so she took the hit of his energy on herself. The Union leaders, especially Ian, were greatly surprised when they saw this. They didn't expect Jessica to be so strong. All around also came in amazement when little Jessica, in an instant, was able to defeat a secret warrior from the north. Watching all of this, Julia noted the fact that Michael has a pretty strong team that won't abandon him. A girl named Flora managed to survive. It was on her that Jessica applied so-and-so. Flora recognized her power. Clara's boyfriend's name Jane began to wonder how strong Michael was if he had such a team. Michael, meanwhile, threatened Edward over the phone that if he touched any more of his men, you wouldn't be his assistant. Edward was in a daze. He didn't know what to do as this was the first time he had ever had his assistant taken prisoner in such a situation. As stated that his main condition would be an 8 billion buyout and that it would remain between the two, with no government involvement. Meanwhile, the people who were busy killing Michael's subordinates in the permanent valleys. Edward, in a moment, stopped all of his men and informed them that if anyone else touched Michael's subordinates, they would die. Already pondering who might have turned them in, or where they lost that the government found out about all the plans. Meanwhile, see the Black Union man, asked Michael, and all his men to surrender without detaining them. Our hero stated that he knew the measure, and also offered to help the wounded by leaving blood. Right at that moment, one of the squad leaders, he gave the order for his subordinates to engage at any cost. And so it was, after his order, all moved into battle and began to fight against their enemies. The commanders also realized where things were going and removed to their subordinates the order of military admission. In just a short while, as many as 3 divisions, 100 warriors each, were assembled in just a couple minutes. The Union leaders were very much surprised at this point. They had a huge number of warriors of the North itself against them. The old man at this point reported that it would not be easy, as he remembered that the front leader of the northern troops, Anfisa, agreed with her father, stating that she can already see that their armament is top-notch. After a couple minutes, all the weapons that had been collected were pointed at Michael, only he and his team confronting the troops. The leader of the northern troops said that it will not be easy, so they will not use spears to start. Franklin realized that he could not do without him, and immediately began to use his abilities to protect Michael from the spears. Franklin's defense enveloped Michael and his team from all sides, create a favorable barrier for them. However, behold, this did not stop the northern troops at all. They moved forward immediately afterward. After which, the order to attack, and the full-scale battle has already begun right now. The soldiers tried to use rockets and other weapons Franklin's armor still held, saving our hero's team. However, lo and behold, the army of the North didn't stop there. They continued to attack, even more and more. Jessica intervened again, using her level to deflect the missiles coming at her. Thus, along with Franklin, they organized a duo, Jessica covering up top and Franklin underneath. The strongest warriors of the northern squad decided to intervene in the battle. They tore out of their seats and headed forward. Michael watched the battle carefully, as these 2 warriors were very strong. They were worth controlling. Our hero started yelling at the old man. He was talking about how if he didn't do something like this, everyone around him would die. The old man began to take off his clothes, talking about how Michael is generally right, and he decides to join the battle. Captain of the northern squad, he gives orders to his men to be careful when seeing the old man's tattoos. After that, but he has everything giving orders about running away. At this point, the old man is already activating the energy. Seeing one hit, the old man creates a huge stream of energy that starts to crash everything around him. The technique is called Galactic Strike, and even the finest warriors of the North could not resist. Flora was just as herself eliminated very quickly, a huge stream of energy pinning her to the ground. The old man in turn felt his beard and was very proud of himself, for he had succeeded. Michael abruptly grabbed the old man and began to berate him, saying he was being irresponsible by using too much energy. Once upon a time, the old man was one of the strongest emperors. He was even on the cliff, among the best. However, there was a disaster that resulted in the death of his wife. This situation hit him, his morale too hard. And while the old man was away, recovering from his injury, the Red Union leader wasted no time and seized the territory. Even a purple emperor named Donald made his first trip around the world. The leader of the northern squad knew everything. He decided to use all his strength in order to win today. He shouted information to his warriors that they had very strong enemies against them. They should not be underestimated. While the old man was fighting, Michael and the boys wasted no time. They set all their men and are going to throw them through the portal. Our hero decides to enter into a dialogue with the leader of the Black Labor Union. They discuss further actions and the end of this war. The Black Union leader asks to communicate with him respectfully and not to slander him, adding that Michael is a criminal. It turns out that literary unions and called for this place in the Northern Army, having talked to the Emperor about it. The idea of sending so many forces there belonged to the Emperor. This greatly surprised the leader of the Black Union. He looks at Michael now and realizes that even with this much power, it will be hard to defeat him. And everyone else too. In the moment, Michael is attacked by a Black Union leader, Christina, without grabbing her by the neck. Holding her by the neck, Michael talks about wanting to see her boss, or rather talk to him. He also pulls off his mask and face, for he is intensely curious as to what is the face under Christina's mask. Underneath that mask turned out to be a sweet girl. With tears in her eyes, she looked at Michael. Michael is very surprised when he sees this, because he never expected such a result from his actions. Christina is embarrassed. Michael gives the mask back into her hands and steps back a little, leaving the whole situation in the hands of the rulers of the North. The King of the North, or rather the Warlord, picks up a special contraption and then creates a huge beam of light into the air. Even after that, the leader of the real Black Union himself showed up. His name was Jordan. Jordan became very angry and questioned who dared to hurt his daughter, Christina. Christina put on her mask and with tears in her eyes began pointing forward directly at Michael. Jordan began to fly straight at his enemies, screaming that he was about to destroy them all for his daughter Christina. Michael immediately began to realize that he could be in big trouble now. It made him a little uncomfortable. Our hero, dramatically with him, is that in a past life he remembers the news when a huge number of people died in connection with the Red Labor Unions. Remembering the newspaper headlines of those days, our hero realizes that absolutely everything was lost then, but now it can be fixed. He also remembers that both emperors, Black and White, died that day. Then the Great War began, between the remnants of the labor unions, which lasted a whole year and ended in nothing. Now Michael began to think about how best to change the course of events so as not to repeat what had happened before. Our hero began to shout about his greatness, about his power, thus making himself look great. Hearing this, Michael's enemies started yelling at him. Even harder, the energy started going to his eyes, which surprised everyone around him. The leader of the northern troops began asking Jordan to be less impulsive, saying he was being misled. However, lo and behold, it doesn't help at all. The pulse of energy in him began to spread out in all directions. Immediately afterward, Jordan was on top and launched another burst of energy straight down. The entire energy charge hit Franklin directly, thus stripping Michael of his allies and his huge shield. This made Jessica very angry. She had come to think of Franklin as her friend, and here this happened. She is very angry. Jordan was very much surprised by the strength Jessica showed, for he had not expected such an impulse from an ordinary girl. This moment, our hero conceded the fight. He stopped Jessica, stating that it was impossible to kill Jordan now. However, now instead of Jessica, it was Jordan himself against him, the two of them fighting against each other. Wanted very badly and techniques that apply Reddit Union, and Jordan noticed it right away. Michael yelled that it was none of his business at all, and also mentioned that Jordan's son had paid him back. Michael's allies just stood there and watched the situation. They couldn't close to believe what was happening. Jordan began to threaten our hero that he would break his power source, thus rendering him disabled. After which, everyone not together raised a huge energy and began to fight a duel. It was with great shock that he discovered what Michael's strength was equal to that of the Red Union literature at the peak of his powers. Michael in turn began shouting out the name of the technique, talking about definitely defeating his opponent. In a moment, right behind George's back, an old man appears and tries to stop him. This triggers George's old feelings. Using the powers of his energy, the old man blocks various spiritual points of his opponent George. Their daughters look on with shock at the whole situation. They didn't expect their fathers to fight today. Christina started talking about Michael taking off her mask, and it was very surprising to her. This again brought even more shock to Jordan's eyes, as he had not expected the problem to be this big. The leaders began to discuss among themselves that Michael was obviously hiding something from them. Jordan began to turn to Michael and ask about his decision to die in that spot. Jessica notices that Michael's mood has plummeted, and he is very anxious. The hero was really in shock, and when he used superpowers, the number of his days dried up but a few. Looking at the timer now, he is well aware that there is only 3 o'clock left and problems need to be solved. In a moment, out of a beam of light, the silhouette of the Emperor appears, who is immediately addressed by Michael. Michael turns to him and asks if someone can report 20 billion to him before their conversation begins. While at his palace, the Emperor confirms the deal and immediately transfers all the money to Michael. This all comes as a big surprise to the rest of the Union leaders. They didn't come close to expecting the Emperor to give money so easily. The Northern Army commander added that after this transfer, Michael would have to pay the price all his life. Here, however, Michael was more interested in something else right now, namely the fact that he wanted more money with each drink. Our hero considers the option of escaping to another world, however. Since there are still a lot of monsters, he cannot do it. The only one who can bail him out in this situation is Emperor Donald. In a past life, they made a contract. Using the wounds near his heart, Micah at any time can summon Donald. I remember it now. A complete epiphany came to Michael. He realized something that could call to him at any moment through his family's initials. However, Michael didn't know how to summon him in a way that would save them. They just came here. Our hero could not make a decision. He considered many options, but could not choose the best among them. The Emperor began to turn to Michael and talk about how this was his advance for the near future, for the sake of keeping peace in the continent. Meanwhile, using healing techniques, Edward tries to help his subordinates by restoring them to health. In a moment, Edward's non-human strength began to awaken, the energy beginning to consume him. Meanwhile, the trial is coming to an end. The judge raises the red flag, and many subordinates get into their cars. Jan reports that the sovereign has revoked their unionized status, and now their only hope is Michael. After that, people their own open portals will be prepared to accept the same, then cause astonishment to the leaders of labor unions. From these portals, zombies began to emerge, bringing ammunition and other resources with them on carriages. The masters of portals among themselves communicate about how many attributes they have left to open spatial gates. Since the attributes left are quite scarce, they ask all zombies to speed up in order to make it. In a moment, Ian is greatly surprised. He sees something in front of him ahead of him, right in the portal, and comes to a shock. It turns out to be a huge robot using energy as a weapon, developed on foreign soil. Our hero Michael goes to his friend Franklin since it's already over. He wants to help him out from the beating he got into. He used his powers, but also asked Franklin to conduct the circulation as he had been taught to do, so that the process would be hastened. Franklin talks about it being quite difficult, but he succeeds, and little by little the gates open. As Michael unlocks his brother, he recalls the old man's words that really hurt him during the fight. And then the old man talked about Michael taking on too much responsibility and people, yet is actually still weak. Looking at Michael's team, the old man explains, "The bigger part is that they are the ones who saved Michael in this battle, not he himself." Now Michael began to ponder those words, realizing that he was indeed still too weak for much. 3 days pass from that moment, and our hero is finally able to free Franklin from his imprisonment. These 3 days, Jessica didn't sit idle. She created herself a new armor using energy and started to show it to Michael. Michael is surprised by this, and even envious, because it took the participants quite a bit of time. During this time, however, she drew from her energy, and down she went. Franklin found a familiar phone. In time, on another part of the lands, Edward was completely consumed by red energy, taking over his body. Edward's aides immediately realized what was going on and began to take out pills to calm their leader. While Edward was in this state, his assistant reflected on the fact that he would rather die as a human than be in this state. Edward heard this, did not ask his assistant to be more polite as it was unacceptable. He threatened his aide with eating them if they behaved inappropriately. He managed to leave the body of the beast, and here all that was left was this ordinary monster. Edward asked him to get lost. Meanwhile, our hero Michael was watching his timer, perfectly keeping track of what had become his 67 days to live. Along with his friends, Michael sat in a field and restored energy using circulation techniques. Classes did not like our hero at all, but from Franklin and Jessica found in them something funny. Franklin fell asleep, Jessica wasn't paying attention, and our hero noticed that it was snowing outside. Some time passed and our guys were completely covered in snow. A black union leader was walking by and noticed these snowmen. However, lo and behold, Christina didn't like snowmen at all. She took out a knife and stabbed it, and inside was our hero Michael. She froze in place in horror as she pulled the knife out of the snowman and found it covered in blood. The moment, the men in Black Union were attacked by the minions of the Red, to which our hero turned his attention. This battle was not between humans, but between monsters, which surprised our hero even more. Truth turned to the monsters and stated that the leader of their union was about to be destroyed. They had better run away. She also added that if they chose to submit, she would spare their lives. However, here, this didn't interest the monsters at all. They still wanted to win at any cost. Michael watched with a smile, waiting for the monsters to attack Christina and defeat her. Christina also made the decision to fight and pulled out her knife, clearly signaling that she would fight. Before the battle began, she began to make her last oath as if before her death, and the monsters began to attack. At that moment, Michael appeared from behind, stating that he would not let Christina die until he finished his business. Our hero ran near her and asked her to stay alive as long as possible. In that place, a huge violet-colored beam appeared, which was visible even in the other lobes, including Jordan, who saw it. He immediately realized that this was better than his daughter's death, and began screaming and crying, asking who dared to do this. The commander of the northern troops immediately declared that he would gather an army right away and find the offender. With tears in his eyes, he stopped him from coming forward, saying it wasn't necessary right now. Hell, he explained that she had a life element, so she was most likely still alive. He asked to send someone after her. As it turned out, her recovery process began, and she activated her demonic ability. However, even that didn't stop Christina's enemies. They clustered together and prepared to attack. But just one hand movement and a small amount of energy was enough for her to eliminate them both. Immediately afterward, it was introduced upwards like an arrow that soars above the world. The blood of Christine's opponents stained Michael. He stood in shock and did not understand what to do because he did not expect such an outcome. What confused our hero the most in this situation was that he didn't know the technique she used. Meanwhile, it began to rise and swell in size, accumulating more and more energy. Afterward, she headed over to Michael, grabbed his face and started looking him straight in the eye. At this point, Jessica woke up, along with Franklin, who was glad to have gotten a good night's sleep. Our hero turned around and began shouting, urging them to hurry back and talking about the attack being carried. Jordan watched all of this, or rather Christina's actions, liked and understood why things were the way they were. However, here, he was genuinely upset that his beautiful daughter was overcome by a pig like our hero Michael. In a moment, the old man snapped out of his seat. He headed towards George and started yelling something from behind him. Well, apparently it was too late by this point, and someone's strong energy started covering the back of the whole place. It ended, not so lamentably, for the old man interfered with the fight and struck hard. But here is a strong influence. It did not give, as their enemies had excellent regeneration. The enemy clenched his fist and praised the old man for his strong body, but said that there were not many like him left. The old man activated more of his body's powers and began to tell the enemy to surrender faster. The old man's opponent stated that the one probably tasted very good, but he replied that old bones should not be chewed. However, lo and behold, an opponent named Bolt got into a fighting stance and stated that he wanted to try them after all. At the same time, Franklin activates his armor, thus creating a huge protective barrier. At him, he protects Michael, and at that moment Jessica is so on top using fire magic and dragon technique. Well, things don't work out so well, as Jessica accidentally mixes up the sides, aiming her attack straight at Franklin. Our hero looked at this with a judgmental look and realized that he had a mad woman against him, and a very strong one at that. Looking directly at her, he tried to analyze her body in order to understand the type of energy and attacks. While Michael watched, Jessica and Christina began to prepare for a fight against each other, but Michael noticed one detail. And the point of that detail was that Christina didn't wear damage on him at all, ignoring him and only targeting Jessica and Franklin. Thus, our hero was able to block all of her attacks by simply moving around the area. One moment, our hero grabbed her hands and began to hold her down, telling her that enough was enough. Michael scooped her up on the ground and started talking about how nothing so bad had happened to kill his friends. Meanwhile, not far from this place, there were Red Union men, including Edward. Edward's aides were reporting to him that there were huge bursts of energy not far from where they were. Meanwhile, Michael began to scream. He called out for Franklin's help and asked him to cover Christina with his cloak. He couldn't hold on like that. Franklin, of course, didn't refuse the jersey, and graciously began to help by lowering her energy attacks to the side. He built a dome of energy pretty quickly and started shouting about being ready. Created a special fortress with Michael and Christina inside. Jessica sat outside with him, watching everything. However, in a moment, the Red Union men showed up outside and started walking toward Franklin. One of the assistants stood up, stated that he could handle his subordinate himself, and began walking toward Franklin. Discernment was simple and very brief. He reached forward and began to start the flow of energy. Franklin started talking about how he didn't want to fight anyone, and also started asking for the swords to be put away. But the aide didn't see it that way. He declared for Franklin to get ready, for they were about to have a fight for life. He began to direct streams of energy directly into Franklin, and he only defended himself against them the whole time. And in response, Franklin's opponent began to approach him, using movement thanks to the energy. Franklin continued to defend himself. He realized he had enough strength, but he didn't feel like attacking at all. The other men, the Red Union men, were greatly surprised that Franklin was able to block the aide's attacks. Jessica was also suffering at this point. She was very hungry, expended a great deal of energy. Meanwhile, at White Union headquarters, the situation was being actively monitored and observed on all sides. Specialists at headquarters were able to find out that the monster beasts very soon will come to the city. In the moment, Anfisa gives an order. following which everyone must leave the headquarters, take things, and leave urgently another location. Well, it's not just that. The towns near the border have been attacked with huge monsters coming in. It was among themselves and trying to decide where the palace they really wanted was located. However, in the moment, they saw ordinary people, and it was to them that all attention shifted. The aggravation of the situation in the district, everyone recognized. It reached even to the top, to the judge himself. Then the prodigal son of the judge showed up and demanded of his father that he be sent to war. His son for 3 years did not even get out of bed, but now he is asking to go to war himself. Meanwhile, there was a battle going on between the old man and his opponents that lasted until now. A man named Volt from the Red Cult fought against the old man and was forever insulting him by shouting different words. However, despite the rather powerful and rather formidable attacks of his opponents, the old man still held on. It was possible to counter several people who would all attack at once, and sometimes together. But Bolt talked about how even though the old man was very strong, he couldn't run away from his age. He began to attack more aggressively and talk about how the old man's body was already quite limited. In the moment, right above Bolt's head, was a man who launched a small rocket with explosives. The green capsule with a special explosive exploded violently and created a green circle of energy around it. The old man and his subordinates just stood there and watched this, and at this moment the bolt was vomiting blood. The old man's men still want to continue their attacks, but he asks them to take their time and not to chase victories. The old man started talking about how this bomb could work on them too, so they should be careful. Immediately afterward, the old man's aides scrambled to take stock of the whole situation and began to discuss the future plan of action by map. The old man then turned to his aides and offered to go defend the city, but they wanted to go home. Meanwhile, the events of the story take us to the Judge Emperor, whose palace happens unusual things. The Emperor began to turn to his son and talk about not being able to go for a walk today for the first time in 3 years. However, lo and behold, the Emperor responded by saying that all he wanted to do was just lie in bed and die one day. Meanwhile, the events of the story carry over to the bench, which is happy that Christine has finally calmed down. However, while Michael was in this room, he had already practically gotten sick as it was very cold. Michael started beating his hands right into that wall and begging Franklin to open it for him quickly. But Franklin is now, with swords in his body, he clearly doesn't have the time to open the door for Michael. However, as it turned out, Franklin was not yet defeated. He found the strength to fight and rose again. Edward's aide was in complete shock. He hadn't expected such an outcome and such strength in Franklin. But after just a second, Franklin collapsed without strength, his defenses crumbling and he himself losing all energy. The aide to Edward began to say that if Franklin continued to maintain such a force, he would have no trouble escaping. Watching Michael, Edward became intensely nostalgic, remembering the pleasant moments they hadn't lived together. However, Edward's aide began to raise his sword and talk about how sometimes when good people get punished. Meanwhile, Jessica intervened in the fight. She attacked the monster, biting it from behind and dealing damage. This made the monster very angry. Jessica did it because she was very hungry. Jessica was pretty upset, especially that the wolf turned out not to be tasty at all, as Michael had said. And at that moment, the monster started attacking from behind and stomping Jessica. He was very angry with her. Franklin intervenes in the fight. Jessica starts to run away in order to save her life, and his own too. Opponent Franklin attacked the ground in blood. A helper began to save him, but he asked not to worry, adding that he would not die. Temporarily, in another part of the lands, the northern troops began to surround their opponents, purposely taking them in a ring. Franklin, with Jessica in her arms, was running away from the monster and ran straight to this crowd to help them. The monster from behind make a sudden attack. However, the assistant who jumps and takes it on his body, throwing Michael aside. Our hero Michael, meanwhile, sits still closed space and sees that he is being credited, not realizing what is happening. However, no sooner had Michael left the area, Christina began to wake up, much to his surprise. Christina began to worry about where she was, and Mike used the invisibility technique to hide. She tries to remember, yes, everything that has happened, however, it turns out to be quite difficult. Christina sits and ponders everything. I suspect she is in a red union den. She looks directly in Michael's direction. However, he uses a technique, hiding from her, trying not to give himself away. Meanwhile, the old man and his helpers had arrived at some place they badly needed according to the map. They started putting on masks and asking the Witcher if their plan would really work. The second assistant, named Kai, added that they had no choice and would have to try anyway. The old man asked them to stop talking and head on ahead, as that's where what they needed was located. Not far from this place, and not far from Miquelon, is a clash of northern troops. However, none of it goes well, and the army suffers huge losses. Even the general intervenes in the battle, fighting directly against the monster, along with his men. He asks not to spare these creatures and talks about how they can no longer be called human, so I won't kill them until the end. One of the officers of the northern troops began to point forward and ask this captain what was there. Specifically, he was pointing to a tower created from Franklin's energy for our hero Michael and Christina. Franklin stepped in to fight against the monster, trying to protect one of his Red Union friends. However, in response, the monster only threw Franklin along with Jessica backwards with tremendous force. Franklin's friend intervened in the fight. He began to attack the one he was previously in league with using sword techniques. Right after he attacked the monster, it attacked itself, absolutely infuriating, and didn't know what to do. However, lo and behold, his soul that had left his body continued to fight using different swords. Turning to the monster, he asked to be understood correctly, stating that it was the will of his soul, now fighting. He also mentions that he found this will when he was on the threshold of life and death, a great discovery for him. But here the monster didn't think so. It was getting stronger and bigger, saying it would still win. After that, awakened the power of an insect, combining it with the form of a beast and obtaining a new appearance. However, at this moment, he noticed a huge number of arrows flying straight at him from the sky, full of energy. Most of those arrows headed straight for the dome, the same one Franklin had created for Michael and Christina. A second after that, the commander of the northern troops started shouting and talking about how they were also under attack. The arrows of energy weren't just hitting the dome, they were hitting everything around it, and Franklin was creating new defenses. In a moment, the attacks on the dome increased, causing it to burst, and Christina found herself alone on the street. Michael realized that it was time for him to intervene in this case, or he would have no other way. He took off his cloak and threw it over Christina, as she had no clothes, and later apologized. With a very sweet and even romantic face, he talked about how he was a little late, but wanted to come early. However, all of this lovely atmosphere was interrupted by the fact that a troop captain had announced himself from behind and was moving towards them. The general explained that he'd gotten orders from the Emperor to go get Christine, but Michael had gotten a little ahead of him. Michael didn't realize much of what was going on outside. He started looking around and all he saw was different battles. And where there were no battles, there were only people pissed off, and people with a lot of spending money. But his friends were there for him. Our hero noticed Jessica lying in Franklin's arms, completely pissed off, and Franklin himself had little energy left. Michael turned to the general and asked him to take Christina and leave the rest up to him. The general consented to this option, but Christina began to oppose him, saying that it was very dangerous. Michael turned to her roughly and asked her not to interfere, just do as told. Our hero drew his sword and approached the conflict, then asked who dropped Jessica and brought her to such a state. Meanwhile, the arrows of the northern troops kept on moving right at the monster from the Red Union. Jessica started pointing Michael at the monster, talking about how he did it and how it was unpalatable. In the moment, Michael is distracted. It turns out to be the soul of a friend of Franklin's named Lester. Lester turned to Michael and stated that he could count on him as the man to take care of Franklin. Michael asked Lester about the sword behind his back, which surprised him, since he was the only one who had seen it. Meanwhile, the real body was already practically stopped breathing, and that surprised him a lot, especially the people around upset him. Michael approached the real body quickly and motioned for him to pass, adding that the blood was almost dry. After that, Michael stuck his hand right into his body quickly, which surprised everyone around him, and Lester's soul as well. Lester's aide was about to kill Michael, but he pulled out of his body in a moment, some kind of monster, a small one. Over all of this, watching from the sidelines were the monsters, who decided that they would be rewarded if they killed Michael now. Michael takes this monster alive and starts squeezing it with all his might, pinning it down and then killing it. Immediately afterward, the wounds on Lester's body became automatically absorbed and the blood returned back. Found the hero happy that he was able to save the island, but you still have a big chance to die from your own wounds. Lester began to come to his senses and thanked our hero for the rescue and the help rendered. Michael took those worms apart and began carrying Jessica to at least get something to eat. Immediately afterward, he, along with her and Franklin, began to eat these worms. After a long fast, they looked very tasty. One worm they ate made them hungry for more, but a little hunger was satisfied. The monsters in the moment were even surprised that Michael had bitch friends, or those worms. Michael remembers that he is left to kill the monster that crippled Jessica, and he angrily tries to find it with his gaze. Our hero turns to Lester and asks in return for 8 of his swords for a time, so Lester can thank him for saving him. Of course, Lester lent his balls, and Michael said he would only show the reception once, and began to raise an aura of energy. Meanwhile, the Emperor addresses his troops and informs them to eat well, for a full-fledged war is about to begin. They all began to raise their hands in the air, wave the flag, and shout pleasant slogans in praise of the Emperor. Michael, in the face of the monsters, is now in wild shock. They were not close to expecting to demonstrate such great power. Our hero used the power, 80 souls at once, and 90 balls that gave him incredible energy. The monsters at this point is in wild shock. They will consider the option of running in, then fighting against Michael will now be very difficult. With wild energy in his eyes, Michael turned to them and asked about which one of them would be able to catch his sword and power now. Meanwhile, Edward, the leader of the Red Union, uses an orb of energy on someone, energizing them with power. The man turns out to be a Union manager who, inside the energy dome, utilizes the monster's abilities. Edward explained to him the fact that he is using a special ball of energy that helps him recover. It also suggests that it won't be long before the family is restored to the family, and it will be in full swing as before. But immediately after these words, he utters his parting words, and a sharp line of energy passes through the body of the Union manager. At this point, Fiona appears. She is the commander of the insect army and informs them that they need to find the red stone. Just a moment after her words, a risk of better energy headed into her body with tremendous speed. She was able to stop this energy flow and also immediately determined that it was launched by a human, not a monster. However, it intensified dramatically and knocked her to the ground. It was with such tremendous force that she couldn't contain it. Fiona didn't understand what was going on, and her assistant said that there were probably still powerful beings among the humans. In an instant, from a portal nearby, a fortress with the Emperor's flag began to appear. There was also a huge flow of energy that began to tear down everything around it, causing a huge shock and excitement. Fiona's aides began to talk about how even the sky had melted at that moment, which meant that the boundaries had been erased again. This burst of energy was caused by our hero Michael, while using a sword technique. Michael stood back, stated that it was over here, however the fun part was just beginning. One of the swords created by Michael and spiritual energy crossed the boundary of the Earth's atmosphere and flew into space. It went straight into the atmosphere and then crossed the boundary of the universe and flew to some planet. Not just the sword, but all of Michael's energy released, grabbed by some person on another planet, and began to hold on. That person was Emperor Donald, who immediately realized what was wrong and that a sword from another planet had come to him. At that moment, Donaldo was fighting someone. His opponent asked him if he wanted to go back and land where that sword came from. The response to his opponent's words, Donald stated that unfortunately he had to say no. He launched a powerful attack of energy and stated that there were people who were very important to him, which is why he was refusing. Meanwhile, in the Emperor's army, it turns out to suppress the monster opponents, namely insects. The Emperor's son, who previously wanted to take part in the war, is just lying on the couch, playing a game, talking about how he is very bored. However, at the same time he's watching the fight, or to be more precise, he's analyzing the opponents to see who they're dealing with. He began to leave for the palace, and by his aid he ordered that orders be sent for the war to continue. Well restored, it was one of the aides who reported the information that the monsters had broken through the border. Meanwhile, Anfisa, along with her assistants, were discussing the way home, or rather the way back home. However, their dialogue was interrupted as the moment failed to notice a huge monster bearing right at them. The appearance of a monster of such proportions greatly impressed and surprised its fear Anfisa. She and her assistant only stood still. And also another problem. This monster had Fiona on its head, looking ahead at our people. Together with his friends, Michael returned to the White Union office, and the old man and his assistants arrived there as well. Michael suggests moving the White Union office due to broken borders. This angers the old man and he opens some kind of chest. The old man states to Michael that they may have a problem with ammunition on the mainland, their supply. In response, our hero declares that if the old man doesn't want it, so be it, but then he doesn't know who will save them in a difficult situation. After that, the old man declares that he's got it all figured out then, and walks off somewhere to the side rather quickly. Michael adds at this point that the gate can close pretty quickly, and it's best to hurry in that case. Old man's aides criticize Michael, don't ask you to be polite to all the leaders. The old man asks everyone together not to argue. He also states that it is dangerous to stay here as the monsters have gotten much stronger. Together where Anfisa is, a strong fight has started, the outcome of which is not yet known, but one of her assistants has already been injured. Anfisa and her helpers began to help each other, but the enemies were all on the move at this point, and moving even closer. Fiona turned sharply to Anfisa and demanded she give her the Soul Stone, in exchange keeping them alive. Anfisa immediately stated that she didn't know anything about it, and they didn't have any Soul Stone. Hearing this, Fiona gave the order to kill Anfisa, her assistants, but at that moment an old man full of energy appeared. He immediately went to his fighting form and stood against his opponents, finally starting to use martial arts. After that, the old man began to accumulate energy in his fist in order to deal damage. Immediately after that, without holding back for a moment, he launched an all-out attack at his opponent, gaining a lot of strength. This attack was very powerful. It killed one of the monsters in them, cracking it apart. After which, Fiona intervened in the fight. The old man ordered his daughter by her assistant to flee the place. Anfisa obeyed her father's orders and began to clean, with tears in her eyes, and her helpers helped. Their help was much needed, for the monsters were still trying to catch up with Anfisa and her men. Anfisa's 3 helpers decided that today would also prove itself, so they cooperated together against the monsters. Just then, Michael was nearby. Using stealth techniques, he asked Anfisa to leave everything to the assistant and leave. Meanwhile, the lonely Christina was looking forward from the window and thinking about something for a very long time, very passionately and quietly. In addition to her thoughts, she also thought about Michael once, and the different things he did that she didn't always understand. She also wondered about security in him now, for the cloak he had given me kept her in suspense. Meanwhile, Michael together with Anfisa ran away for a long time from the journalist who kept them busy. Our hero tried to take Anfisa to a safe place, away from the battle. They headed for the portal. However, right at that time, some monster in black form came out of the portal and started heading towards Michael and his friends. Our hero immediately prepared to attack. He realized who he was dealing with and that he needed to act decisively. A second after that, they connected in a duel and collided auras of energy right next to the portal. While our hero killed so-and-so enemy, the monsters decided to use the portal and began to use it. Michael began screaming and pitching to the new house to get the portal closed faster as monsters began to come through. One of Anfisa's assistants decided to intervene. He attacked Michael's opponent from behind and punched him in the neck. After that, another opponent appears who also actively attacks and attacks. At this point, Michael decides he can completely leave this fight to other people, and along with Anfisa and the reporters run away. The old man, meanwhile, also continued to fight vigorously. He did not yield to his opponent in the slightest, and stood to the end. There were huge wounds on him. He turned to Michael and stated that he was leaving a lot on him. Michael continued to lead Anfisa away. However, she insisted and demanded to be returned to her father and cried afterward. Seeing Anfisa's tears, Michael turned to his aide and the zombies, and after calling for all action, he demanded that an operation be launched to destroy the monsters. The old man himself, at this time, continued the fight. He attacked his opponent with energy and didn't even let him get up. The old man's opponent, named Ronald, was greatly surprised at such immense strength he displayed. Ronald was well aware that he was in a position. His nutrients were running out, and he himself was growing weaker. However, lo and behold, the old man doesn't give a chance for him to think at all. He hits him again, asking him about something he's thinking about. In a moment, hands began to appear right out of the monster's body, and human sounds began to emanate. A second after that, Christina's father, the same emperor who was very angry, came out of there. He was angry that some monster had managed to ride, and also asked no one near him to divulge that fact. But the trouble wasn't over there, for other people came up, namely Fiona and her huge monster. She became threatened by the fact that her bloodline allows her to awaken almost any power. Immediately after that, she issued an order for the monsters to go and eat their opponents. The old man turned to the Black Emperor and inquired about the first time or whether he would fight Ronald side by side. She's saying that she'll listen. It'll be the first time, a battle like this. But it becomes very clear that this was going to be a tough one. It meant that the enemies were very strong. In a moment, huge pulses of charge began to head straight from behind the dragonflies' backs by Ronald towards their opponents. And just a second after that, they were all electrocuted by the huge and powerful shots. It turned out to be our hero Michael. He came with wars and new weapons in order to increase his paycheck in this battle. Everything that was happening was broadcast to the whole kingdom, as the journalist who found Anfisa showed it to the whole world. Over the events, watched even the son of the emperor, who commissioned the creation of a game based on this war. However, watching this war, the emperor's son suggests that something is wrong here. He points out Fiona's inaction. And in this, he turns out to be completely right. So even seeing Michael and a handful of weapons, she was not scared at all, and did not give out even one order. Our hero, meanwhile, took charge, all the controls of the war, and began to give orders for the removal of the wounded. In the moment, Fiona talks about finally waiting for something, never mind the beam in the sky. Turns out it was Emperor Edward who had arrived. Holding his aide in his arms, he announced that he had finally returned. Edward raised the blood energy and then began to fill his assistant Luise's body with it. Through such machinations, he managed to get Luise's body turned into that of a monster. Michael continued to command the army. He gave orders to the weapons and to his subordinates, explaining how to proceed. However, lo and behold, Edward was already on his way. He used the blood wall techniques to make himself stronger. Michael, together with the old man and Edward, began to observe all that was going on and were greatly surprised. What Edward was saying was that everyone who died here was just a huge gift from fate. Our hero began to think that using his energy, Edward will be able to restore all the fallen with blood. Michael's theories began to be confirmed by the fact that Fiona began to talk about being able to revive many people. After learning about the rather large powers she had, Edward became angry, but he realized that it would do nothing. However, a second later, a monster appeared behind Edward's back and pierced through him. Turning to Edward, Fiona said something that people don't stay the same after using such power. Fiona began to turn to one of the monsters that was in charge of the Beetle Battalion and give orders. Our hero Michael watched this for a long time, but later still decided to at least smile with this whole story. He started laughing and talking about how they all had lunch waiting for them, and it was time to go home. However, Ronald, Christina's father, stopped him and asked him not to leave as he had a conversation to have. The old man also intervened in the same conversation and also told Michael often that it was not worth it to leave. In one voice, they began to demand of Michael to stay here and go out to fight, as it had been a long time since they had fought. Michael didn't like that idea at all. He began to wonder what was going on. The old man pointed to Jessica, stating that she was much more determined. And it was true, for as it turned out, Jessica was already headed for her new enemies alone. However, she didn't want to fight at all. She asked Fiona to take her home. But in response, Fiona started attacking and talking about how Jessica is just an ordinary citizen of the magical world. In a moment, there is a sudden explosion that overpowers Fiona's attack and sends her herself sideways. As expected, it was thanks to Michael, specifically the fact that he and his sword stopped the strike. Michael began to remember his past, in which his friend Emperor Donald had shown him the reception of the powerful. The essence of the technique was to create a huge buildup of energy and then explode it. Then our hero did not understand what the essence of this technique is because it scrambled through the whole planet. That day, with this technique, Donald managed to create a seed, and he began to offer Michael to eat it. While in the magical forest, Michael refused to do so at first, but afterwards he agreed in exchange for a high-level armor. Returning to reality, Fiona stood poised and couldn't believe what was happening, and such power. Michael responded by saying that everything that was going on didn't matter now, because Fiona had dared him to attack his men, and he would pay for it. Our hero also unlocked a high-level armor that became completely golden. In it, he looked like a true prince. Upon seeing her, Jessica was in a daze, so close she hadn't expected such a high score from Michael. Here is our hero, in response began to scold him, saying that she has lately had enough of life, and she is always looking for trouble. Fiona began to talk about how she had seen this armor once before, for it belonged to the race of the infirm. After that, she decided to act. Using the energy began to attract the bloodstone to her. Michael shouted that he could not be allowed to fall into her hands, and together with the old man and Ronald they advanced. One of Fiona's aides attacked them. However, Donald decided to take him on, starting a battle with him. Initially, the old man wanted to help him. However, the old man himself was against it. He shouted for the old man to leave. The old man began to scream. Donald's pleas not to die, then headed straight for Fiona with an attack. However, by this point, she had already begun to absorb the bloodstone into herself, slowly starting to utilize its power. Fiona delivers a mighty blow with her energy, knocking the old man to the ground and blowing a hole in his body. Michael notices this and also realizes that he is using the bloodstone technique and decides to attack from behind from the back. He also uses his attack and refers to it as a golden dragon slash hovering over the world. Michael's attack is successful, for the bloodstone in Fiona's hand has been cut. Fiona was even surprised by this. She just couldn't believe it and stared at her hand without stopping. Michael, in turn, started bragging and talking about how his cool bug armor allows him to do other things. However, he is greatly interested in the question of where the second part of the stone is, for he thought he had it in his hand. At this point, Fiona became frantic. She started attacking very sharply and demanding Michael to give her the stone back. Michael's friend and old man, Emperor Ronald, intervened and repelled one of Fiona's attacks. Ronald began to chase our hero Michael away, as well as talking about getting out of the way and not interfering with his fighting. At first, Michael didn't understand why the Black Emperor was so aggressive, but afterward he noticed the lack of an arm, as well as the dark gaze. But seeing the look in Michael's eyes, he began to turn to him, talking about not dying, and also knowing about Michael having good healers. The moment, the old man also intervened in the fight, with a huge reserve of energy, and also said that he was the one who told Ronaldo about the good doctors. The old man's attacks were very powerful, one might even say unforgettable, as they squeezed everything in their path. Michael started to look up and asked Ronald if Fiona was dead, but he stated that apparently not. Most of her body was torn, but in a moment, with the help of blood energy, she began to repair herself. Our hero stood still and looked at it all with wild shock. He didn't even know that such a thing was possible. Meanwhile, Fiona began to create a huge ball of energy around herself, absorbing everything around her. Michael, along with Ronald and the old man, decide to attack all together in order to achieve high efficiency. Meanwhile, the Emperor's son's aides notice that Luise is quite sad about something. He was crying and talking about how his friend Luffy from the development department was already dead. With tears falling in his eyes, he spoke of how very saddened he was by this, and it was a great loss to all. Luise began to look forward, talking about how death was still so imminent, going into its hands was not the best option. He spoke of how they could only hope that a huge force would appear on the battlefield on their side. Our hero Michael, meanwhile, began to lose his armor as it took off for a living, and this took off money, which he does not have infinite. Ronald began to turn to Michael and ask about why he had removed his shiny armor at such an inopportune moment. The old man didn't understand this either, so he turned to Michael and asked him the same question. Our hero began to notice that Fiona was absorbing the lives of fallen soldiers, using their blood through a special stone. She also addressed everyone, talking about how as long as she wasn't on this continent, they could become food for her body. Our hero was at first frightened, but afterwards he thought that perhaps in another continent, it would be possible to escape the influence of the stone. He started yelling at his assistants, and talking about getting busy with the portals instead of just playing cards. However, they in turn paid no attention to this at all, and continued to play cards. This pissed Michael off a lot, and he yelled at them more and more, urging them to pay attention to him. The first to take action was Jessica. She used her second form, an adult human and a dragon. A couple minutes, a man appeared from the portal and began to address Michael, saying that they had gotten his message. After that, the zombies began carrying all the wounded and other fighters into the portal, crossing over the humans and carrying them into the portal. At this time, journalist Anfisa worked hard to pass all the information to the masses and not to forget anything. People and other journalists began to portray everything that was happening, as well as record, in order to pass on the books. Meanwhile, Prince Luise's aides claimed not to have prepared all the necessary runes. In response to his words, Luise lowered his head and asked the aide what the difference was between a man and a woman in hard times. Meanwhile, a huge blast of energy rattled the air and threw Ronaldo and the old man back down. This was noticed by Michael, who noticed the fact that his allies were badly wounded now. However, lo and behold, they didn't show it, and immediately got to their feet, telling each other that they were ready to continue the fight. Michael's aides announced that all the people couldn't fit into the portal right now, but Michael was clearly not concerned. Michael gave orders to nearly close the portal, rescue the wounded, and reduce the casualties. Our hero took the sword in hand and headed towards Ronald and the old man, walking towards them already with quite a bit of energy. Michael asked the old man and Ronald to step back temporarily and give him a pass to fight his battles. When Ronald walked by Michael's side, asked him for his choice, to sacrifice one person and save an entire town, or vice versa. With a smile on his face and a dark look in his eyes, he said that there was no need to choose because everything was pretty obvious. Immediately afterward, Michael stated that it was then unfortunate that the Black Emperor Ronald would have to die, and swung his sword. The hero, covered in golden energy, and began screaming for the gate to be closed as soon as possible. All of Michael's assistants and the old man himself crossed the gate and afterward began the process of closing it. Anfisa looked at it all with tears in her eyes and wanted badly to help Michael, but the old man wouldn't let her in. Christina was also watching the situation using the television and was very much surprised by Michael's actions. Ronald sliced Michael in two with one blow and began to ask him what his last words would be. This moment, Michael was once again transported into his consciousness, where he met a part of his father, who was holding a part of the bloodstone. Our hero once again sat and just stared at his father, thinking about what had happened in the meantime. The Black Robe of Soul turned to Michael and again asked to call him Daddy, and no other way. He started pointing out parts to me with his soul and asking about what he was doing in his hands here. Father Michael asked not to hit him and also not to take that stone away, somewhere uncultured behavior. He began to explain then that the Soul Stone, the Bloodstone, is the best means of feeding the Bracelet of Time. Michael asked this if it meant that if the bracelet ate a piece of the Soul Stone, it would cause one to enter this world. In response, Michael's father stated that it wasn't true at all. It was just that in this particular stone, he poured a piece of his soul. Michael became angry that he had died from the fact that his father had, once upon a time, given this stone to some tribe. The father of our hero also said about the fact that Michael is still alive, however, he just lost all his money. He immediately thought that it might be true after all, he had subconsciously used strong techniques. But a piece of Michael's father's soul claimed that this stone could give Michael as many as 9 lives. However, the problem was that Michael only has half to me, and therefore only 3 lives. In order to convince Michael to use the stone, his father transported him to the normal world, showing that the confrontation continued. With wild astonishment in his eyes, Michael watched as the Black Emperor fought Fiona single-handedly. He started shouting that he would use the most powerful technique. This was what happened, for he used soul destruction. Meanwhile, on the other side of the portal, everyone had already accepted Michael's death as well as the Black Emperor. The old man was greatly upset. Christina's deputies began asking her to calm down as she lay on the floor and would not lift her head. Through the camera, she saw on TV the way her father had turned to stone, and Michael was already dead. Fiona began to talk about how such a human existence deserves her trust, but it's still lowly. Being conscious of the space, Michael looked ahead and realized everything that was happening, and that he needed to go there. Meanwhile, the events of the story show us Emperor Donald, who informs us that his father has just been murdered. Starting to use teleportation, he turned to his opponent and stated that he had urgent business at home, so he would be distracted. The monsters started heading straight for the city and wrecking everything around them, and now no one was stopping them. I had a Fiona in control who gave orders to smash everything around and kill. With eyes full of blood, she spoke of the fact that there was a lot of prey on the continent that they could really use. Also asked everyone to gather more energy in order to open more gates on purpose. Into this world, Donald arrived. He held his father's head in his hands and looked at it sadly. One of Fiona's main defenders, snapped out of his seat and headed in his direction to attack. But unmoved, Donald gave the order for him to kneel and rest. Immediately after which, a huge number of monsters around kneeled down in front of him and didn't move from the spot. Such a strong and even creepy aura of Donald could not be resisted even by Fiona. Her whole body was shaking. Holding back a scream, she spoke of how she couldn't understand what this powerful man was. Closed her eyes, and he felt that her entire existence and life depended on the swing of this man's hand. Then Emperor Donald gave them an order. He instructed them to bow down until they died. What happened was, they bowed very quickly. They each crashed to the floor, crippling themselves, literally killing themselves. All of this was watched by people through the camera, including the prince, using his console. Our hero, meanwhile, was still in the space of his father, who was forever cooking him meals. Michael started talking about how this is your father, very different from the past, and he was a total douche. The part of the father he met today even knows how to cook, not just answer stupid questions. Michael's father began to talk about how Donald is in a terrible state now. He is greatly saddened by the death of his father. Our hero's father began to ask about whether Donald was telling Michael a piece of her past, from her childhood. Michael retorted that it didn't matter much, because every time Donald meets an opponent much his, he's breaking the laws of nature. Our hero began to remember their old dialogues. Then he asked Donald about how he was getting stronger each time. Donald stated that he is improving with each new battle, getting stronger and more powerful. Without Michael, named Thomas, stated that everything is correct. However, there's a problem in that this way, Donald could one day become full-blown evil. The thought of this greatly frightened our hero Michael, because he realizes what will be in his future if Donald becomes evil. Afterward, Michael decides to return back to the outside world in order to bring Donald's senses. His father Thomas bids him farewell and also speaks of holding dinner for him on such an occasion. Meanwhile, Fiona begins to pull down all her powers in order to spend them on the confrontation. The sight to use one of the most powerful techniques precisely against Donald and believes it is appropriate. At a great speed, and it comes straight at Donald and is almost at his head. After 1 second, a huge bolt of energy hits him directly in the head, yet not even a single scratch is left on him. On the contrary, instead, his eyes charged with a powerful violet energy, making it clear that his attitude was critical. In the moment, everything around him rises up and is colored by his energy, and he himself begins to scream. A second after that, a stream of blood started coming straight out of Anfisa's art, dealing quite a bit of damage. There is a sudden whirlwind, the weather changes drastically and lightning strikes, and the wind has become so strong that it tears down buildings. Prince Louis, at this point, looked up and asked everyone not to panic, saying that it might just be the end of the world. Meanwhile, our hero Michael returns back to the outside world with a huge influx of strength and energy. He immediately looks at his opponent and tells him that he's had enough of being so lucky on this one. Michael yells at him and tells him that he's losing his mind, so he should come to his senses soon. Our hero comes closer to him and tells him that he understands the sentiment perfectly well too, and is willing to put his shoulder down for it. Michael puts his head on his chest, talking about how he's always ready to help his best friend in any situation. However, in response, Donald chops off Michael's arm and delivers a critical blow to his body. Panic begins in the kingdom, audible even to the street, as they have lost communication and access to cameras. All the assistants among themselves trying to understand what happened and cannot come to a single conclusion. The connection was cut off quite abruptly. Our hero Michael, meanwhile, yells at his friend Donald for doing such an ugly thing. Michael, gets into his mind. His father asks him what he should do, and he says it's pretty easy to guess. He begins to look into the portal, and guesses that half of the crystal is still in Fiona's hands. Meanwhile, the ordinary world appeared Donald's friend, named Daniel, who grabbed Fiona by the neck. He watched his eyes and laughed, talking about how she was a low-level biological being and nothing more. However, at this point, Donald became violent again and created a huge vortex of energy. Danielle talks about how this whole situation is ridiculous, and whoever is supposed to be saving the planet is now destroying it. Fiona at this point tries to escape, however Danielle grabs her and prevents her from going through the portal to the magical world, after which he squeezes the remains of her body, thus shattering it, leaving only a stone of blood. Doesn't say that he's finally taken another stone, and now he's the closest he's gotten to the core power of the gods. He discovers that there is only half to me left. This scares him badly, and Michael appears from behind. Our hero tries to take another piece to me, but in response receives only a huge blast of energy instead of his stone. Daniel begins to hold and strangle Michael, and afterward asks him how many more lives he has. He also yells hard and asks about where the others to me and the other half of the bloodstone have gone. Daniel threatens that if Michael doesn't return the stones to him, he'll turn to dust, to which our hero replies with a smile that he doesn't mind. He looks at the t-shirt and can't figure out how it managed to hide the scent to me in there, because he can't smell them in all of them. And in the moment, along with Michael, they are both covered in a huge charge of purple energy. The blow did not hit Daniel hard, however it became quite critical for Michael. Daniel talks about how he can't believe that Donald is killing people for his own ends and doesn't understand why he sent Michael here. Responding by using his darkness, Donald managed to fly, and afterward asked Daniel the same question. Lying on the ground, Michael turned to Donald and claimed that he had already killed him twice in one day and would pay well for it. Daniel, meanwhile, started using fire techniques and talking about how this was now his planet. But in just a second, all the fire techniques were shattered by a huge flood of darkness that consumed everything around. Based on what's going on, Daniel started talking about how Donald is apparently going to destroy his home planet. Daniel started yelling at Donald and offering him a trade. In return for a rock, he would be willing to give up this planet. He also began to address Michael, offering to give him a planet 10 times the size. Literally in an instant, Michael had created several rocks around him and claimed to know how to control them much better. Shocked, Daniel began to talk about how Michael was just fooling around, and in reality he wouldn't be able to withstand that kind of force. Michael began to absorb the stones into himself, but his bracelet stated that using this type of absorption, he would lose many lives. He started getting really angry about the bracelet and talking about how these things are discussed in advance. Daniel became angry and loud, talking about how all the power of his stones had just disappeared and he couldn't feel it. Afterward, Daniel talks about going and destroying Michael now, but a harsh voice stops him. That gruff voice ordered all things to stop. Even Donald himself froze in place. Even Michael's allies, who had been watching everything through the clipboard, abruptly froze in place, utterly shocked. In the outside world, the soul of Michael's father, Thomas, appeared and spoke of how he would not let his son be turned to dust. Thomas started pulling everything towards me and saying they're not top quality, so he's going to take them for himself. Afterward, Thomas turned to his son, Michael, stating that he had probably watched too many heroic movies, for you can't absorb rocks like that. Thomas was completely right, as Michael was practically already dead, his eyes turning different colors and half of his body disintegrating. He also started talking about how it was his fault here, because he didn't warn Michael that he could have stroked all those rocks through the bracelet. Afterward, Father Michael used the power of compensation, cheating time backwards by a full hour. Our hero immediately came to his senses and began to live a normal life. Most of all, he was glad that his hair was in place. In front of him was immediately his father, Thomas, who informed him that they had not seen each other for a long time. Michael began to run away from his father, and asking what had happened and where everyone had gone, his father began to explain that he had stopped time. Our hero began to beat Daniel, saying that he was a kind of stone hunter too, and would not tolerate such humiliation. He also began to rejoice and talk about how by gathering everything to me, he has as many as 37 lives. Michael's father reported that he helped solve the rest of the problems, and our hero replied that he had not expected such actions on Donald's part. But Thomas didn't think so. He turned to Michael and declared that the biggest change here was himself. Thomas also stated that he can't help the evening and the stones to me won't work all the time for Michael's benefit. Already stated that she doesn't have to listen to even her son at all, so he shouldn't have to ask for requests forever. Well, in response, Michael stated that he is to Thomas the ultimate trump card, which is why he can continue to use it. Thomas began to yell at Michael, saying that he dared to threaten his father. At that moment, Donald appeared nearby and stated that he thought Michael was right. Thomas, along with Michael, were greatly surprised to see Donald in front of them, who had previously only stood still. Donald began to apologize and talk about being out of his mind for a while. He also explained that he hadn't heard their conversation before either, when they forgot to close the portal to the regular world. Michael didn't even realize that Donald already knew how to use such techniques. Thomas also said he underestimated him. Started to blurt out, in his body talking about how he still had a lot to do, so he'd be on his way. Before leaving, he also turned to Michael and asked him to find any remaining parts of his body. Michael gave him an approving look and agreed to it, though he himself didn't understand what it was for. Donald began to say goodbye to Thomas, while Michael looked back and tried to find Daniel. After saying goodbye to Thomas, Michael shook Donald's hand. They began to officially be acquainted in the new world. Everything pissed Daniel off, and he started yelling at Michael, asking where he had put all his gems. Meanwhile, Jessica, along with Franklin, were sitting on a balcony somewhere, eating ramen. In the moment, Thomas showed up next to them and offered Jessica Franklin more food to cook. At the same time, Donald turned to Michael and talked about figuring out how to bring all the people back to life. However, in response, our hero said that he was not ready to do it at all. It even scares him a lot. Donald began to offer our hero huge sums of money and to take him on various quests in return. But in response, Michael started talking about how it was more of Donald's own interest than his. Donald himself intervenes in the dialogue and starts talking about their obligation to return the stone to him. Daniel snapped out of his seat and headed toward Michael and Donald, saying he would kill them. He ended up right beside Michael and Donald and began throwing powerful punches in an attempt to knock them back. Oh no, since Donald is on our hero's side, he helps him, dodging Daniel's attacks. However, he is well aware that without these stones, his strength is greatly diminished. Meanwhile, Thomas feeds Jessica, lets me more and more different noodles to taste. Using portals, Thomas displayed different images to Jessica to make it more interesting for her to eat while looking at something. In a moment, he began to deduce and story about how the murderous young girl was with a rich man. Thomas asked Jessica not to blink, and onward to many interesting things. However, seeing it all, she was greatly surprised. Meanwhile, 1 hour passes and Michael's bracelet begins to glow. This surprises him a little, but not critically. Donald's body begins to be covered in purple, powerful energy. He talks about feeling an influx of strength. Once again, Danila gets really pissed off by all of this. He calls for them to stop. This is serious about everything here. He began using his close techniques, which he hadn't shown before, to kill Michael along with Donald. Michael also decided to team up with Donald. Together, they created a combined technique called the Imperial Strike. Their combined attack was very powerful, so much so that they created an attack of better energy that went from the Earth, reached the other planets. Daniel was thrown far out of the atmosphere, but later collapsed unconscious not far from the point of impact, right into the palace where the prince was. All this time, the prince had been watching the battle using his devices, and now he was very happy to see Daniel. An unconscious Daniel was right in front of him, but the prince was well aware that he was dangerous and ordered the men evacuated. Meanwhile, immediately after the powerful attack, David Donald fell down and began to lie on the ground. Michael was scared at first, but afterward he noticed that Donald had just fallen asleep, and afterward he confirmed it himself. Our hero Mykova decides, seize the moment, and unmask Donald to look at him, but a portal opens behind him. Michael is greatly surprised, especially when he sees his father, Thomas, have Jessica arrive at his house through a portal with a bunch of stuff. Jessica stops where she is and begins to cry dramatically, just staring ahead, silently. Meanwhile, the angel of Ronaldo, Donald's father, stands over him, right in the palace, his son just lying down and sleeping. However, he's not just lying down and sleeping, he's been in this state for days, absolutely uninterrupted. The touch was also there for him. He turned to Ronaldo and stated that he was stronger when he came back to life, and he confirmed it. However, this whole incident, he was greatly disturbed, as the beasts this time were many times stronger than before. Meanwhile, all the other guys who took part in the war are just sitting around eating in the mess hall. Initially, and I liked the idea of eating at this place, however the food here turned out to be very tasty, even for such picky people. Franklin, all this time, had been sitting there and just eating, but now he snapped out of his seat and announced that he was off to train. Between themselves, the guys discussed the fact that the people on Michael's team are very strong. However, Michael himself has not been seen for a long time. Anfisa also wonders where Michael is, and the deputies tell her that it's on one of the neighboring mountains. Meanwhile, one of these mountains, there is a powerful confrontation. Some man is very aggressively attacking his opponent. However, the one in turn do not lose hope and fights off all the attacks that come at him. The man fighting back is our hero Michael, with his father Thomas sitting next to him, watching the fight while eating ice cream. Our hero Michael decides to use his superpowers and activate some rings. Here, however, Thomas throws a fork at him and thus stops him, saying that he should eat. Michael is stressed by all this because he has long been unable to come up with a new technique that would be powerful and not resource-intensive. Turning to Michael, Thomas talks about how there's no point in using so much power because it's easier to make big money. Thomas also tells Michael not to try to become the strongest, because if he does, even immortality won't help him. After that, Thomas starts disappearing and telling Michael that the magical world is much more complex. No to Thomas, Michael declared his life, just his life, so he would command without any gods. Michael also tells himself that he now has Jessica, an existence that even Thomas doesn't know exists. Whereupon, Michael turns around and looks straight toward the mountains, feeling all the breath of wind in himself. An hour after this meeting, a priest with his assistants arrived and stated that they had something important to tell Mike. They handed Michael the phone and stated that the prince himself wanted to talk to him. Michael was fine with that. Right after Michael picked up the phone, the principal immediately asked him if his father could be resurrected here. Michael replied that he couldn't do that right now, after which he and Prince began discussing video games together. But here, talking about games didn't motivate our hero much, so he hung up. This upset Prince Louis a bit, however, he understood that Michael was living this life so as a game. Louis was visited by his men from the army, who declared that everything had been carried out as stated. A man from the Blue Union also came to Prince, saying he had lost a lot of people and wanted to restore the loss. He also stated that the Emperor of the Red Union and leader of the Red Wolves had been caught by them and taken into custody. To this, the prince stated that he was most likely watching an attempt at a small riot right now, and he didn't like it. The aides agreed with him. Afterward, the prince replied that he was going to change one game mechanic in order to keep the continent alive. The Blue Union men started laughing at his words, talking about how the world is not a game. Then Luise replied that then they could try to kill him. The gutting of the Red Union Emperor got up appearing energized. He started talking about how if he wanted to, right now he would get out. Noticing that he was using his other uniform, the Blue Union men also activated their force. The leader of the Red Union approached the prince, called him brother, and suggested a walk. He started looking at him, praising him, and talking about how he had gotten so much taller. Temporarily on a high mountain, Michael's golden opponent met with Daniel, immediately began to beat him. However, lo and behold, this didn't bother Daniel at all. He just stood still and tried to get his stones returned. Meanwhile, the events of the story take us to a magical world, some kind of prison, and the people there are discussing something. Unidentified guy, talking about demanding information on where to get delicious food like this. Opposite him, right up against the wall, is Jessica, who is imprisoned, presented with iron bars. Some guard, a pig in armor, Jessica, and carried to another room, unclear for what and where. He brings her to the study room and plops her right inside, as if thus insinuating that she should study. Jessica is lying on the floor and trying to come to her senses. Next to her is a girl named Sakura who is looking at her. Sakura grabs Jessica and worries about her a lot, asking about if she's okay. She sits down against the wall and begins to eat her cereal, talking about how she is only afraid of one thing, and that is to starve to death. Jessica gives cereal and Sakura, talking about how this deliciousness was given to her by her brother Michael from another world. Sakura began to ask Jessica why you ran back to this world when the other world was so much better. Jessica started crying and talking about seeing a future where her head was chopped off there. Sakura was greatly surprised by this, especially that Jessica had seen such a future, also greatly horrible. Jessica started talking about how she still believed that Michael would come for her and get her out of that hole. Some time comes and someone tells this story to the warden Oscar, who laughs out loud. The girl who told it turns out to be Sakura, and she relayed everything Jessica told her in great detail. Meanwhile, our hero on the phone receives a message about what is happening with Jessica, and it makes him very angry. Afterward, he goes into another chat room and talks about getting everyone to gather the royal army faster, because they're moving out. People from the magical world, the very ones connected to Jessica, appear in our hero's ordinary world. They turn to the journalist Anfisa, asking her why she is following them. They don't understand how things work here. She starts to explain the nature of her profession, but at that moment, our hero Michael appears from behind, through a portal. Michael opens a few more portals, then gives a curt order to evacuate the civilians. Our hero shows them a balloon, the image of Jessica, and offers for her stacks of cereal, but this does not satisfy his opponents. Some living wolf grabs Mike and talks about being one of the strongest people in the magical world, after which another one in armor gives the order to open the gate to the outside world right now. And so it goes. The portal opens, and from there a magical dragon from another world emerges with an aggressive attitude. Michael's opponent, a man named Oliver in armor said to be a dragon, is capable of destroying the city with a single swing. However, in a moment, the entire continent of the city abruptly rises up and begins to soar above the world. This scares Oliver wildly. He can't believe this is even possible and stands in wild amazement. He decides to give the dragon an order, inflicting a powerful tete-a-tete, and it begins to build up energy. Right after that, he does indeed unleash a powerful attack, right at the root of the city that soars above the world. But something strange happens. All of the attack he charged at his opponents came back at himself. And it did not just happen. There was Donald, who gave the dragon orders not to attack. After that, Donald with one swing kills the dragon and puts Oliver in shock, introduced close to not expecting to get such a rivalry in the regular world. Oliver started yelling for his men to kill Michael quickly and later return to the magical world. Meanwhile, Oliver notices that Michael is at his strongest, and his entire army is already dead. However, as it turns out, Michael doesn't choose to part ways and gives the order to launch an attack on the magical world. Meanwhile, the events of the story takes us to a magical technical college that is in the other world. Local people discussing the fact that Oliver has been gone for quite some time now, but the portals are still open. They consider the possibility that something might have happened, but realize that Oliver is a pretty strong man. The moment they don't notice the dragon's head coming back and rejoicing that it was a success. But in just a second, more portals open and the dragon returns home sliced to pieces. And in one of these portals appears our hero Michael, who is in a full state of mind to start a war. At breakneck speed, he heads for one of the local towers and blows it up in an instant. But our hero realizes that he won't be able to use only strength for a long time, so he should speed up. Along with him to the battle comes Donald, who looks at this world and does not understand anything. The local defenses showed up in full force and began to conduct a rejection of the invaders. Together, they try to attack Donald alone, but here is easily dealt with thanks to his speed. However, since the situation is quite critical, a whole plane appears in the sky with better bombs. One of the main captains of the magical college is Mr. Pig, who takes part in this war. But his participation did not last long, because the plane of Michael's army knocks him down and instantly kills him. In the whole attack, also actively participates Franklin. Using his shields, he helps our hero a lot. Michael himself, meanwhile, is running through the hallways and down the street looking for Jessica. However, in a moment he is stopped by a sudden explosion, a huge amount of fire blocking the road all the way. A huge, powerful explosion left our hero up, however. The explosion was not one, followed by another wave of explosions. Michael was greatly surprised to see such a strong flame. She reminded him a lot of Jessica's strength. However, from behind that fire, a man appeared, armor and long different robes, with a huge amount of fire around him. The man's name was Charlie. He introduced himself as Jessica's teacher and stated that she herself was not here. Meanwhile, Donald, using the portal technique, fought against one of the officers of the magical world. But, in a moment, his technique failed, for he was unable to get the part back in his hands, which surprised him. Donald's opponent, an officer named Jake, began to talk about how if Donald found the strength to fight him, he would find his arm as well. He began to threaten Donald with the end of his life, but that didn't scare him much. He continued to use his techniques and fight. Michael, meanwhile, was still also running around the castle, looking for Jessica. In a moment, some girl called him off by name. This girl turned out to be Sugar. Michael was surprised. However, he looked at her, and she immediately said she would help find Jessica. Sakura led our hero, one of the doors stating that right behind it is Jessica, or rather a part of her. Michael had no sooner opened the doors than they themselves exploded from the powerful outgoing stream of fire. At first, Michael thought that Jessica was just having fun, but then he looked ahead and was surprised at what he saw. Inside was Charlie, and his hands. He was holding the juice of Jessica's hand, which was blowing huge charges of fire. Michael was very angry when he saw this. He started to lash out and talk about him stopping doing that. But in response, this guy used one of the techniques against Michael, which threw him to the side with great force. Charlie talked about how if you learn to use your abilities, along with Jessica's abilities, you can unite the world of magic. Sakura intervened in the fight. She used one of her blue stone powers to help Michael confront Charlie. Charlie responded by stating that you shouldn't rely on these to me, and also began gobbling up absolutely the same. At this point, Michael began to attack him using various energy techniques, and he fought back in return. He was very good at reflecting attacks and afterwards covering everything around him with fire, thus creating obstacles. With an angry look on her face, Charlie asked Michael if he couldn't manage with so few stones. In response to Charlie's words, Michael stated that the latter is completely right, so our hero's response will be interesting. Michael uses his bracelet and part of Jessica's arm, which allows him to absorb all the energy around him. All the consumed fire and all the energy that Michael had he began to use in his techniques. Charlie stated that it wouldn't help Michael save Jessica, who showed parts of his arm in return, saying that at least he already had something. After a couple minutes, Charlie's body burned. He couldn't handle the energy, and his last words were about a certain witch. Turned to Sakura and asked about what they were doing with Jessica, and what the Great Witch had to do with it all. Sakura revealed that earlier in this place, Jessica had been given a special injection with the DNA of a Great Witch that had immense power. Meanwhile, Donald continued the fight with Jack, and I tell him that he's about to get stronger here, having seen his techniques. In just a couple steps, Donald managed to get behind Jake's back, much to his consternation, in a situation like this. Donald also explained to Jake that there was nothing unusual about it, as it was his usual teleportation technique. Donald managed to get a piece of Jessica's leg, which our hero Michael is after now. Jake's aides began asking about where Donald had taken both the captain and a certain portion of the men. Donald responded by saying that you don't have to worry about your friends. He sent them to the right place, namely, the Earth. These words greatly frightened Jack's assistant, for he did not expect that their opponent were capable of using multi-universe techniques. In response to the aide, Donald said he could demonstrate some more techniques on him, but the aide declined. Meanwhile, Michael, along with Sakura, were heading to the chemistry room, and there's supposed to be another part of Jessica's body. Michael tried to maintain a strong, brutal look, but deep down he felt very sorry for Jessica and very scared for her. In a moment, some hands, stone hands, emerged from the ground and began blocking the way forward. After that, there was even a magic cage whose technique strongly resembled Franklin's technique. The man who did this turned out to be Raymond, the physics and chemistry teacher at the place. Well, after a year of pressure, the cage was destroyed, and Michael approached Raymond, asking him to give him Jessica's doings and stay out of the way. Meanwhile, Franklin himself was running around off-road looking for someone. Apparently he had gotten lost. In order to take one of Jessica's body parts, namely her left leg, or rather her top view in general, Micah got into a fight with Raymond. Our hero was not at all frightened by his techniques, but the huge amount of sand which accumulated in Michael embarrassed him. Raymond talked about how Michael had a very weak body to fight him, so he was doomed to lose. Michael grabbed a piece of wall and hit Raymond with it, saying that he didn't have a weak body at all. However, the moment their fight takes a completely different stage, abruptly Franklin appears, who with his shield knocks everything around. Raymond abruptly raised a huge amount of energy and started talking about how they wanted to help Jessica, not kill her. Upon hearing this, Michael instantly grabbed Raymond by the neck and started talking about how they were all just using her. Our hero held Raymond by the neck, or else he talked forever about Jessica showing up at the school on her own and asking for help. Raymond revealed that they had used all their powers to arouse her powers at her own request. How he started talking about how if he didn't know certain things, I might believe it, but now he doesn't. Donald, who had already finished his bouts, decided he would help Michael a lot with one swing, and afterward demanded for an additional fee. A second after that, Donald directs a huge attack right at this college, chopping off half the roof. After the building disintegrated, all the people gathered in one open area, and Michael noticed two more scientists. One of them was holding a stand, having removed the cloth from it, lifted up, turned out to be a clockwork head, alive. Jessica started demanding that her body be given back to these people, and the scientist guy next to her confirmed this by saying that they would betray her powers. As proof of their kindness, they put Jessica's head down and started talking about wishing her nothing but the best. Raymond immediately gave up the part of Jessica's leg that he had, stating that Michael should have been on his best behavior. Jessica's head began to cry and talk about how if Michael didn't believe them, he should at least believe her. But in response to her words, Michael stated that it was more likely that they wanted to cheat, just like before. Michael opens the portal, and together with Jessica and Donald, they go back to the White Union headquarters. Dr. Lester started talking about how the only way to solve the problem with Jessica would be in a safe place, so Donald would have to work. Donald stated that it is easy to resolve this issue, but could still be an additional cost for his defense. Immediately afterward, Donald opened a portal and launched a bolt of energy into it, crashing a certain spaceship. But following that, another portal to the magical world opened, from where 3 more ships appeared. On one of them, aboard stood, along with his army, Commander Alex, who was a very powerful man. Michael saw the entire situation through headquarters and ordered no one to panic, but to use maximum defense techniques. So the tech took in a ball, the entire ship, and began attacking it from all sides, producing explosions. Donald turned to Michael and asked about whether we should intervene the battle and do something about it. Michael stated that Alex is a rather dangerous man. In the future, he could be the key to uniting the 2 worlds. Upon hearing this, Donald immediately exclaimed that such a man should not be killed. He would be very important to the world. Michael didn't like it. However, he realized it was the right thing to do, as Alex owned a huge number of trade channels. At this time, began to address Arkira and talk about how you can't just come in, destroy his college, and leave. Immediately after that, Alex gave the order, the use of the technique Young, and a huge purple hammer appeared in the sky. Michael's aides began to report that a huge and very powerful youngster had appeared in the sky, and the defenses could be breached. Michael starts talking about how Donald is going to show everyone how to wrestle, and he agrees, but not willingly. Hello, right, because the dome of protection our hero Michael was in with his men. They all fly downward at great speed and hit the ship harder and harder each time. Helpers began reporting that they had noticed an unusual structure that halted the ship's descent. Michael and everyone go out on some ground. He keeps having a tense moment with Donald, acting rather uncollected, and there's a huge reliance on him. Afterward, Donald announces that he's going to head upstairs and check out what's going on. However, Alex's men and himself are either so excited to jersey his men, so they direct the attacks with energy downwards. But Michael and his boys just as easily, and he sends a huge attack of energy up. Alex's aides boasted to report that they were able to shoot down the ship and it was successful. However, lo and behold, Michael began to expand the energy around him, prepare some technique. At the bottom of him was Donald, who began to help Michael and lift him up. Michael, using the technique, spun off the energy, and at that moment, Donaldum let it go up, pointing it towards Alex. Donald's strength and Michael's powerful energy want to punch the ship through. Alex started to look at Michael in shock, and he started talking about coming to make a deal. But Michael immediately outlined the fact that he would need the trade routes that Alex uses. Hearing about the trade routes made Alex tense up. He hadn't expected Michael to know about them. Our hero stated that he knows a lot, and turned to Alex, asked how he wants to see allies around him, or his enemies. Oh no, in response, Alex stated that it was naive of Mike to think that with so little power, he could even slightly threaten. In response, Michael said that these were not threats at all, just a warning that he also had power. Immediately afterward, our hero got a sword and began to swing it, creating a huge energy around him. Alex was not so simple. He also used the power of energy and enveloped Michael with it, thus taking him in a snare. This situation was noticed by Donald. He immediately realized that things were going wrong and began to help Michael beat back the energy. Michael stated that he was fine. However, he was greatly surprised that his sword was melted in a couple moments of just a couple moments. Alex asked him to understand him correctly, because before Michael, no one had ever spoken to him like that, but very boldly. Our hero began to talk about the fact that apparently they cannot agree now, but the scientists from the college asked Michael to be more restrained. The scientists start talking to Alex and tell the madam that Jessica is the perfect match for his criteria. Meanwhile, the stupid college officers tried to keep attacking on their clumsy dragons. Alex approached Michael his men, asking them about whether they considered themselves worthy for business talk. Our hero ignored Alex. He turned to Donald and asked if he happened to be thinking what Michael was thinking. Alex leaves his assistant Lord here and starts to walk off somewhere silently. Michael starts to leave as well. However, Raymond shows up from behind and attacks him sharply. But that's not how the attacks work at all. Simon is very surprised and screaming. He can't understand what is wrong with Michael and why he can't beat him, even using Jessica's hand. The girl is a scientist, realizes that Raymond is only trouble now, uses the freeze technique on him dramatically. She began to gloomily glare at Raymond, talking about how after Alex left, Michael was their only hope for life. Michael, meanwhile, is going somewhere and contemplating what seems to be a situation he's already gotten into, however, in a different kingdom. Our hero also talks about the fact that here around, a lot of traps, if you do not pay attention, you can easily die. Immediately afterward, Michael delivers a sharp fist punch right into the wall, which shocks everyone around him because he had just talked about traps. However, right after Mike's punch, a stone fell out of the wall, the green emerald that Michael had come for. Holding the stone in his hands, Michael bragged about how he had managed to get his hands on such an interesting stone. Jessica was also interested in this. She started asking about if she could eat this rock and never go hungry again. Michael understood the true application of this to me. He was very good at containing the force without showing it to everyone around him. It also allowed you to change the clothes and make them different. This also interested Jessica a lot. Michael takes the stone and starts to leave, but asks Donald to stay here and guard their ship because it's important right now. Well, right on the way out, there was a monument that in a moment abruptly shot straight ahead with some kind of arrow. An arrow at great speed was injected directly into the head of our hero, which greatly surprised him. However, it didn't turn out to be anything critical. He just got it out of his head and threw it away as if nothing had happened. What surprised our hero was that the arrows were energized, so someone had recently restored them. Michael noticed that everyone around the country was looking at him. Unclear why, he turned around and explained the situation to them. Surprised him, the number of arrows increased dramatically on all sides, and our hero realized that he had to act somehow faster. He began to run through different countries, but nothing helped much, because traps were placed at every step. Reaching the next corridor, he encountered people made of amber. It confused him more than surprised him. While he was considering them from behind, someone showed up and stared at him apprehensively, and afterwards said hello at all. Hearing the voice, Michael turned around. Seeing the horrible and frightening sight, he was abruptly startled and screamed and stared forward in terror. However, it turned out to be Franklin, who apologized for this greeting and reported that he was doing well. Using Franklin's protection the rest of the way, our hero walked safely through, nothing hitting him. Franklin began to ask about what else they would do and why they wouldn't just go home. Michael explained that they needed a better quality stone. In his head, Michael realized that Jessica's power was immense, and that ordinary stone might not help the situation. After a couple minutes, Michael came to one of the rooms in the cave, in which he saw some strange figure looking at him. Franklin was about to declare that it wouldn't be dangerous for Michael, but immediately afterward, a trap flew into him. But the thing that surprised Michael the most was something else, namely the bracelet that was on his arm, which abruptly began to glow. Our hero has also noticed that the status has changed. Apparently his father Thomas is involved somehow. Michael decided to move closer to the statue. A corpse of some woman in a very horrible condition abruptly fell out of it. In a moment, this woman turned into a young beauty and started poking his jersey from all sides, which scared him a lot. He dodged all the attacks, but he couldn't understand how this woman had turned so young and beautiful in the blink of an eye. Michael was also embarrassed by the bubbles that were on all sides and did not give him any peace at all. Michael stopped and started sweating and bubbling. They say it's quite fun and they give different effects. At that moment, his father Thomas appeared in front of Michael and stated that he congratulated Michael on finding another piece of his soul here. Michael wanted to start talking to his father, but he noticed that this girl wouldn't let him go, and Vaseline was pissed off about it. Her name was Monica. Michael's father marriage created a table with food where he seated Monica with his son. They began to talk. Monica turned to Michael and Thomas and began to explain to them that she didn't remember how she got here, but she remembered that her brother was in trouble. Our hero was a little surprised by this and stated that most likely Monica's brother had been dead for a long time and there was no point in looking for him. She began to argue with Michael, talking about how she hadn't seen her brother either and couldn't say that. Michael remembered how many people Amber had interrupted before coming here and realized that Monica's brother was most likely among them. She started crying, talking about how this just can't be happening and she can't believe what Michael said and wants to believe that her brother is alive. Thomas explained to Michael that she has been coming here for about 100 years, and now she has blue tears. Her body has changed. Monica asked to be killed if she couldn't see her brother, but in return, Michael offered to let her go with him. Michael then sent her off to the side and ordered her to wait there and cover her ears. This surprised Thomas greatly, but Monica obeyed. Now our hero turned to Thomas and asked what he was doing in this world and whether he had not accidentally sent Jessica here. Thomas began to declare that he couldn't explain such matters, but Michael asked him not to play dumb. Michael's father asked not to be pressured and started talking about how there are tons of memories in this world related to Michael's mother. This surprised our hero greatly. He didn't expect to find out that his mother lived in a magical world. Thomas handed Michael the box he had found here and asked him to be careful with it, for it was very important and powerful. From that moment passes some time, and our hero Michael comes back, which surprises everyone around him. Back with Monica, Michaela contemplates seeing for herself rather than taking Thomas's word for everything. When Michael came out to his guys, they were all surprised to see Monica. They couldn't understand where Michael found her in the caves at all. And our guys go into the portal and into the ship and start passing things through the open dimension into the regular world. From that moment on, a few days of the road home pass, and Monica's body becomes coated with an infectious energy. She starts to get angry and cry, however. Michael grabs an arm and asks her to calm down, saying that nothing terrible has happened. Michael helped and cover up all traces of toxic energy. I'll also explain, so she thinks she's more human. Monica, along with Michael, get in the car and start running somewhere. Michael suggests they go shopping. Together they go to the mountains, namely to the market, where Michael's first order of business, along with the zombie helpers, is to buy apples. Michael starts giving orders to his men to load all the stuff onto the ships, and meanwhile, he's eating apples. Altogether, they fulfill requests and loads all the goods needed. Mostly this is done by his zombie assistants. Our hero bought up almost everything in the market, using the amber he found in the cave for payment. This pleased the sellers greatly. Which time the zombies finished loading the materials and began to consider the route by which to advance. A couple hours after that, they all moved forward together and started walking through the mountains to another settlement. Monica was the happiest to embark on this journey. She was forever repeating that her home was just around the corner. Donald asked Michael if he had told Monica about the fact that it had been 100 years. Our hero stated that he had, but she didn't care. Monica had already pictured in her head how she was coming home, and there I was already being greeted by her mom and brother. Picturing her family and the joy in her eyes, Monica was already practically crying, out of happiness. However, in reality it was just as sad as Michael had said, for there was a huge rock in front of her instead of her home. Jessica noticed that Monica was crying, so she started talking about being her sister. In honor of the thanks, Monica began to hug Jessica and talk about how much she appreciated it. Afterward, Monica took Michael and the others to the house of someone who once sent to the cave. And problems, Michael and the guys were surprised. In front of them was a very strange settlement, and all around would be huge eels that devoured the building. The locals began to explain that no one had lived here for a long time, and only young mages came to cast spells and fight monsters. Michael immediately understood the point, and declared it was a hopeless place, nothing to look for. However, here was one cave where they could look for something interesting, and they decided to go there. Donald immediately claimed that someone wasn't following him, and asked the t-shirt if he should take it off, but Michael assured her that he shouldn't. Where around the cave, Michael said about Monica not trying to find anyone here, because it's been a long time. Monica said she needed to heal her illness, and to do that, she needed to find the writings of the very same magician. However, in a moment, their sweet conversations were interrupted by the appearance of a huge insect right in the cave. In the same cave was a squad of mage elves who fought against the monsters all the while. Their squad was called the Fires and specialized in fighting powerful, huge monsters. The guys from the squad immediately entered the battle. Without waiting for anything, they began to repel the monsters' attacks. Not far from them stood our hero Michael, together with Monica. They were silently watching everything happening, trying to understand what was going on. In the moment, one of the squad members kicked Jessica, throwing her off. He began to run forward, telling her to stay out of his way. Michael immediately went over to Jessica to ask if she was okay. She told him that she was fine, but she hadn't eaten in a while. With a crazed look, Baikal turned to Donald and asked the Tom to kill the man who had kicked Jessica. Donald replied that he would be happy to do so and would not even charge a fee for this service. Monica, meanwhile, walked over to one of the monsters with her head sticking out of it, started looking at it. And afterward, she all but turned to him, talking about how they used to be on the same team, asking if he remembered her. But in answer to her question, all she got was a wild aura except for the last one, and a sharp animal cry. One more second and she would have died, however. Franklin appeared here and stopped the monster's paw with his shield. Franklin had a pretty hard time containing such an opponent, considering that every second he was throwing new punches. In a moment, the defense abruptly shattered, and at the sight of the opening, a pile of blood appeared. It turned out to be our hero Michael. With his strong form, he struck at the monsters and protected Jessica, Monica, and Franklin. But in a moment, the monster began to regenerate. Monica explained to Michael the fact that it had the property of regeneration. In response, Michael charged a finger of energies, stating that he suspected that this monster used the power of insect restoration. Gaining tremendous speed, Butterscotch 5 only energy, he began to head forward, aware of the vulnerability of such monsters. Seeing such wild power of a monster, or rather our hero Michael, in monster mode, the uniqueness began to wonder if he could really help her. Michael, in a heartbeat, dealt with the monster and suggested to Monica to go look for the records. Jessica, along with Franklin, explained to Monica that she could trust Michael there, since he wouldn't cheat for nothing. This pleased Monica greatly, for it was the first time she felt like a teammate rather than a guest. However, here's Michael. No rush to get out. He tasted monster cows, realizing that he had drunk drinks with that flavor in his past life. In the moment, Michael remembered something and ordered Monica to run faster and started talking about how that smell lures monsters like this. At the same time, right above Monica and the rest of Michael's team began to fall towards me, and a surge of energy began to occur. Monica immediately realized that I was now not going to survive and began to give a joyful but farewell speech. Michael began to head forward and asked Jessica to stay out of it, as her clothes were holding back the force now. Donald appeared abruptly beside him. He stopped Michael with one hand and asked about whether he was all right. Donald brought some dragon's tail for Michael and began offering to buy it, saying it was very healthy. Michael refused such a purchase, and along with the steel ones began to chase the monster, not letting it get away. Jessica was trying to help, and was spewing out some small buildups of energy along with the fire, for which Michael criticized her. Our guys managed to catch up with the monster. Jessica started talking about how there was something wrong here, like the monster was being consumed by something. Nearby was Monica, who was enveloped in energy and huge black trails of power. Michael became excited, talking about how maybe Monica had gotten away with eating the monster that was hunting her. But Donald interrupted Michael's joy by stating that there would now be hundreds of monsters here who would want to avenge their leader. Monica, meanwhile, is launching massive amounts of energy in different directions and is not in control of herself at all. Our hero was almost resigned to the fact that they would be able to help her, but here Jessica burst into the fray and started using her techniques. It was hard for her to fight. She was trying to get through a bunch of monsters, but it was very difficult because they were blocking the way. However, Jessica managed to save Monica. Michael felt ashamed of it, and Donald was none too happy about just standing still. On their way, our boys encountered a puzzle, and Michael began to think about what reward they would get for solving it. Michael looks at his bracelet and tries to get it to help him with this task, and at that moment, Jessica rips the sheets off the door. At the same moment, our guys are attacked. Rather abruptly and unexpectedly, they are attacked by a monster. Hugely fortunately, this whole expedition involves Donald, who was able to fend off the monster's attack and protect everyone. Michael, along with Jessica, applaud him, saying that he fights very beautifully. Donald reports the entire 8th floor. He cleared the monster. Michael, it will cost 7 million, his security services. Our hero is not satisfied with this, but he realizes that most likely on this floor, we'll find the right treasure. After trying on the crown Jessica found earlier, she asks Michael why he didn't pick up the treasure on the previous floors. Michael explained to her that he should believe in Boo, so in the first stages he does not take the treasure. The whole time Michael was telling this, Donald was pounding his fist into the wall for some reason, quite lightly. Michael asked him to stop. But in response to Michael's request, Donald threw a pretty hard and serious punch right into the wall, shattering it. As it turned out, he did not do it in vain, for behind the wall was the sword of the Savior, and next to the Holy Scripture. Seeing it, Michael immediately remembers that he had this very sword in his past life, thanks to Donald. Our hero looks at Donald, who stands beside the sword, realizing that he can be trusted for a companion for life. Jessica began to read the Holy Scripture that says that only one person in the world is able to draw that sword. A second after that, Donald abruptly grabs the sword and immediately pulls it out, holding it in his hands. The aura and energy of this ball was so great that a huge flame dragon flew up and began to soar into the sky. Donald held it in his hands, and Jessica read about how a brave warrior holding a sword could save humanity. Michael was standing downstairs looking at it. Once in his life, he had seen this scene before, causing him to become nostalgic. Immediately afterward, Donald threw the sword back and Michael caught it. That was the plan. Donald originally wanted to pass it on. However, here, Michael didn't realize it right away. Holding the sword, he didn't realize the fact that he had the ability to use it. Donald wasn't interested in the sword. Right under that ball was a rock. It was exactly what Donald needed, and he took it. Our hero looked at Donald with shock and didn't understand what the stone was for, but he knew it was quite rare. In the moment, Jessica cried out sharply, stating that the text of the writing had changed dramatically. Jessica read out. It said to leave the place without touching the stone, taking only the sword. At the same moment, the stone randomly flew upward, defying explanation, much to Donald's surprise. He wondered if the stone could possess willfulness. Perhaps he could get an answer from it, and asked if the man wanted to leave. Our hero Michael at this point was standing still and just looking up, talking about how he was a little confused. There was some kind of voice going around. It was saying that the kingdom was about to be renewed. This startled Michael dramatically. Michael realized that I had a hard-on before the end, save Jessica, so they needed to leave right away. Jessica was having a hard time running at this point, with rocks falling all around her and preventing her from going in any directions. At the same moment, monsters appeared from behind and started running after our heroes. Michael asked to keep an eye on Jessica and activated his powers himself, saying he would take on all the monsters. Monica helped Jessica save herself, but Monica was worried about whether Michael would be able to escape. Jessica assured her that he would be okay. Jessica's main argument was that Michael is an excellent cook, and God himself would cherish such a cook. In moments of conversation, some kind of stone monster appeared and started throwing rocks at Jessica and Monica. Vika attacked this monster and decided to try and burn it, but it wouldn't go through, which pissed her off a lot. Monica realized that Jessica had to be saved in this situation, so she began to attack with her own forces. Monica's shot of energy hit right in the eye, their opponent, but it wasn't yet clear if it had any effect on him. Apparently, and so his eyes became useless, and he only began to attack even more. Monica asked Jessica to take care of herself and put her under attack by getting a huge chunk of rock on top. However, lo and behold, Monica didn't die. She activated the energy around her and began to cover everything around her with it. But the downside of such strong skills was that Monica began to lose control of herself. In the moment, Monica quickly walks over to Jessica and grabs you by the neck, lifting you up sharply and squeezing her. Jessica talks about how she is Monica's sister after all, and at that moment regains consciousness, realizing what she's doing. While Monica and Jessica are chatting amongst themselves, at this point the monster wastes no time and decides to attack. The only one standing in front of him is Jessica, who tries to stop him with words and offer food in exchange for peace. But seeing that the monster doesn't stop, she decides to awaken her powers by talking about how he will pay for everything. At the same time, Michael heads to the scene in the heat, killing monsters along the way. Monica, meanwhile, is in wild shock. She had no idea Jessica had such great power. She began to turn to Jessica and ask about whether these were her real powers. Well, at this point, Michael appears nearby. He stops Jessica and starts berating her and after the monster. However, they are abruptly silenced, for they see in front of them some silhouette, very unfamiliar but dangerous. From this mogul appeared an old man. He turned to Michael, said that it was not difficult for him to prolong his life. This man turned out to be the very master of insects. This made Monica very angry. She snapped out of her seat and began to attack. However, lo and behold, there were a huge number of insects around, and they were all chasing Monique from all directions. In the moment, the old man grabbed Monique and started talking about how he was very surprised that she was generally alive. The old man made Monica on the spot and started talking about how it didn't matter what his consciousness was because she was still in control. The old man's communication really pissed Jessica off. She asked Michael to remove the restraints in order for her to kill him. Our hero Michael drew his sword. He turned to the old man and declared that anyone who touches his friends is in the grave already. Immediately after Michael's words, the old man began to control Monica and sent her body straight into battle with Michael. This behavior of the old man finally pissed Jessica off. She wrapped herself in him and began to attack him. Michael was about to start attacking the old man with the ball. However, the man protected himself with a shield, a magical one. The old man turned to Michael and declared that it was very good fire, but if he did not want to get hurt, he had better let him get his comrades out of the way. Michael began to shout at the old man and to say what he thought of Michael's reckless abandonment of his comrades. Our hero grabs Jessica and carries her away. He dumps Monica and talks about coming back to rescue her pretty soon. However, here, the old man saw the whole situation differently. Using Monica's body, he began to attack Michael rather quickly and sharply. Michael turns to Jessica and talks about whether she can attack the old man with fire if he distracts Monica. Jessica tries to use fire, but tells Michael that it's hard to do so because he's controlling Monica. Monica yells for Michael to duck. However, our hero doesn't make it in time, and she inadvertently uses her energy nets on him. Thus, the old man along with Monica absorb Michael a special cocoon. The old man calls it a great result. After the old man activates a magic circle, the point of which is to sacrifice Michael Jessica's life for the sake of prolonging his life. The old man calls it a great result and says that today he will be free from the shackles of the beetles. Upon hearing this, Monica begins to cry and asks the old man to sacrifice her instead of Michael and Jessica. Well, in response, the old man still hurts Panic and talks about how she's nowhere near the uneven energy Jessica has in her. The old man starts absorbing the energy of everyone around him, talking about how it's high time they gave into nature's hands. In the process of absorbing the energy, the old man exults and speaks of feeling the influx of youth in his body. But as he turns around, the old man notices Michael and Jessica stealing his stuff. This brings a wild shock to his face. He can't believe it and thinks it's complete nonsense. Our hero turns to the old man and talks about how he forgot to mention that he never studied magic, only martial arts. In response, the old man talks about how he doesn't care about that and asks Michael to leave all his stuff where it is. But noticing that Michael wasn't listening, the old man used the insect technique on him, sending them on the attack. At this point, Monica uses her energy and orders all monsters not to attack, stand still. Monica is on the verge of losing control. Well says she won't allow any damage to her comrades. Started yelling that he was Monica's master and would give her whatever orders she wanted, then wanted her to turn into an insect. By this point, Michael Jessica bugs with insect energy storage and started pouring it out. The old man's form begins to get worse, and he himself threatens that he is about to show everyone around him what death is. He begins using the strongest insects, feeding them black magic and soul techniques. These monsters began to attack Michael at once and attacked him non-stop. Our hero only defended himself all the while. The old man rejoiced that his attack was going well and threatened Michael that he would soon become his puppet. Our hero turns to the old man, saying that his time has come, and now he will see the true power of magic. He tried to summon Jessica that way, but she was busy eating mushrooms at that moment. Michael flew up to her, grabbed her by the hair, and began to use his form of strength, thus scaring the old man. The old man yells at Michael and asks him to give him Jessica, saying that she has high magical powers. Talking like you have energy and turning to the old man, I suggested he try to get Jessica himself. The old man began to draw in himself absolutely all the insects, thus using a huge amount of energy at once. Michael noticed this and made it known that he could fight the old man with the same methods he used to fight them. After which, Michael reached forward with his sword and enveloped it with energy, making a pulse of force directly towards the old man. The attack was proving to be quite stressful for the old man. He began to ask Michael to stop, saying that it was wrong to use the witch's power. However, Michael didn't stop there. He weakened his power less and less and pulled all of the old man's energy outward. The dark force that Michael had created had already sucked the old man almost completely into itself, and he was begging and pleading for mercy. Our hero paid no attention to these requests. He turned away and declared that the old man was too inexperienced a man. The old man used his last strength to summon the monster and attack Michael and take him with him to his certain death. At that moment, Monica entered. She hugged the monster and called him her brother because she really saw him as her brother. This surprised Michael greatly. He didn't know how to react to this or what to do now if she became attached to the monster. The monster began to pull Monica down with him. Michael headed towards her, grabbed her arm, and wouldn't let her go any lower. Monica asked Michael to let go, saying that if Michael didn't, the monster would suck him in too. Her words, our hero declared that all this is a huge nonsense. I cannot get out anytime soon. The main thing is to try. Our hero Michael drew his sword and used it against the lingering circle, giving the order to destroy the warp. The sword savior had an extraordinary ability. He very quickly rid the area of problems, thus saving our hero. Monica fell to the ground and began begging to be killed, saying that it was likely the power had already affected her body. Jessica stated that Monica was talking complete nonsense. Meanwhile, she herself continued to eat the mushrooms and get covered in them. Michael started taking horror mushrooms and talking about how she was about to go crazy with this food. Meanwhile, Franklin wakes up. He raises his hands and talks about being him, but scares the royal guards who took him as an enemy. The general of the expedition had already assembled an army against Franklin, for he thought the latter an invader. Michael, along with his team, headed to the guardhouse, recounting all that had happened. But from that moment on, the events of our story go forward, carrying us to the very home ship where the White Union headquarters is now based. The local engineers show Michael their new development, namely a robot invader that fights well. Michael appreciated such a development. What was most surprising was that this robot was intelligent and could calculate the damage it took. Jessica decided to test the robot, but it wasn't strong enough to fight her and started running away. But at that moment, Michael realized that such a robot could be used as a sparring partner for training. And then our hero came up with a second idea to create an army of such robots and pump them up to a high level. However, while Michael was thinking about this, Jessica continued to play with the robot, thus breaking it. Michael's books were brought in. However, Franklin reached for them, for which he received a kick to the stomach from Michael. This upset Franklin a little. He began to cry a little and talk about how he was in quite a bit of pain. The prize hero laid out his books and talked about having time to study them before the witches' competition. He also realized that there would be different leaders for the event. If he became the top leader, he would overtake Alex in points. Michael also asked the helpers to get busy mining crystal ore, for it would be very expensive now. He began to study the books and select the best one to train Sakura to take part. Well, he was perpetually distracted by the fact that Jessica was from the first robot, and every hit took away Michael's repair money. Time marches on. Night falls. Jessica is in Monica's room and tells her about her high school years. Michael watches this. Even though Jessica loves her, she trusts Monica more for information. So our hero eavesdrops. Monica leaves the room abruptly and notices that someone has been watching them and eavesdropping. She begins to run forward to see who it was, and on her way forward she abruptly notices Michael's body. At this point, the hero put a chicken on his head, causing Monica to not recognize him, and decided to attack. Michael abruptly took the chicken off his head and began to ask what was going on, pretending as if he didn't understand anything. From that moment, 6 days pass, and the events of the story move to the royal school called Hogwarts. In the city, near this school, different people begin to gather because the competition between mages and witches is about to begin. There's a strange guy walking around the market stall wearing a magician's costume, and he's clearly high energy. This guy's name is Alan. He leaves money, a lot of it, to each merchant and talks about how he has to go. In the same place is Michael and his crew, who first thing they do is start gobbling up everything they've bought. Sakura is worried she doesn't eat anything and asks Michael about where the competition will be held. Michael briefly explains what's going on and talks about how they should be well paid for the commercial. Sakura also told T-Shirt that the results of these competitions would decide what powers would be used against the dark mages. This surprised and even interested our hero, because he did not count on and did not know any dark forces. Sakura talked about how it's not surprising since Michael doesn't know about the situation on this continent. Dark mages and white mages rule here. Explained that there are very strong dark magics, but there are also a lot of white magicians who have a high level of power. She also talks about how the cost of using such magic is very high and people can start mutating. Michael listened very carefully, but couldn't understand. Couldn't dark magic just be destroyed? However, the dialogue was interrupted by the sharp words of the presenter, who announced that all leaders and teachers could rise. First of all, the organizer of everything that was going on, namely Emperor Alex, began to rise on the stage. Following him, up came the second leader, a kid named Alan, who was also in attendance. The third leader was a girl named Nami. She also went up on stage to Alan and Alex. However, lo and behold, all the celebration of the moment was interrupted by Jessica, reporting that she had a stomachache. Meanwhile, the announcer began to announce for the students who are participating in the first round of the competition to make their way to the field. The second presenter began to tell about the essence of the competition and also explain what to do and how to do it. Immediately after her explanation, she addressed everyone and wished them good luck, saying that she would love to see everyone in the finals. People who observe exams and competitions were greatly surprised to see such valuable prizes this year. The college participants also rejoiced. No, today will not witness the launch of a new currency, and this is a valuable moment. The school knights were the first to say they were ready to participate, adding that 20 people would be speaking from them. The gift of the Tsar was very cohesive. They motivated each other and gave advice, thus improving team spirit. On top of that, another plus was that they had 3 teams instead of 1. The leader of the girls' school announced that 20 people would go from them, whom they had carefully chosen. And Namami laughed and called everyone stupid kids too. Alan asked her if she was going to stop them. Nami explained that no, since the kids you school are very kind, but sometimes disagreements do pass through. Alex saw the benefit in it all. He talked about, to himself, that he could get the support of the voters if he won. Immediately after his words, a huge fruit of starting energy appeared in the sky and developed everywhere, marking the start. The host, with a happy face, announced that the games could officially be considered open. The knights ran first. They shouted various slogans of their team and wished each other good luck. The men of the wild school began to repeat after them, and straightway being on the boars, went forward. Meanwhile, a third generation, once in 100 years renewable coin appeared in the sky as a reward. Our hero Michael at this moment was sitting in the toilet. His pocket fell out 1 coin, which rolled on the street. Michael's assistant saw this and reported it, but Michael told her not to worry, as these coins are not accepted by merchants. However, as it turned out, it was one of the very coins Michael had dropped, and it was a new generation. Time was running forward, Michael's of our team, running through some magical place up ahead, trying to find something. The competition was already underway, and our heroes in parallel were trying to escape from the monster that were catching up with them. The team of armor-clad mages were coordinating each other and trying to find the best option for mutual aid. They tried to call for help on our hero and Jessica, but you did not burn with the desire to help them. A team of knights were also in the area and fought. They had heavy losses but again helped each other. The men from the girls' varsity team fought the best, but suffered huge losses in that regard. Many of the organizers discussed among themselves that even with such professionals, it was quite difficult to defeat black magic. Meanwhile, our heroes were trying to escape from some man named Van Gogh, but he was forever chasing them. Sakura, meanwhile, found the special coins. She called one of her squad leaders and reported it. Meanwhile, a couple of kilometers away from this place, Michael, along with Jessica, kept breaking and smashing everything. Our hero rejoices in the fact that he's pretty strong, and no caves will stop anything. The place where Michael arrived by Jessica is home to his zombie workers who mine crystals and everything else. Observing all this, our hero is much agitated by the question with you, at what rate he will exchange it all and whether it will be profitable. However, in a moment, Alan appears nearby on a horse and tells you that mining their country's resources is illegal. And he started pulling out his sword and talking about getting Michael ready to die. You can't get any other punishment here. But our hero cannot be taken so easily. He drew his sword and began to fight, raising a huge amount of energy. Alan entered the fight with Michael, and at this point Michael couldn't take the advantage over him. He also started talking about how Michael is a very good sword and asking about where he stole it. Michael was not satisfied with such a question. He began to talk about the fact that he had bought this sword and was ready to sell it in case of anything. Alan responded by saying that he knew all about the sword and that it could not be used while the wielder was alive. Immediately after that, and he started using this U attack, hitting our hero more and more, but he still held on. Alan was launching upwards fire energy, talking about ripping out the resources of their side as unforgivable as possible. 7 days before the exams began, Alan's men came to his office and told him about Michael and his behavior in the market. They also handed him a letter that had been written by one of Michael's assistants. This letter contained the coordinates of the mining site, and the coordinates were correct. There was indeed a mine there. Present time. The fight between Michael and Alan is over. Alan stated that he was just testing Michael's strength. Alan also took some of Michael's blood, stating that they have a tradition of making vows through blood. Immediately afterward, using his fingers, and he transferred his blood to T-shirt and vice versa, thereby making an oath. Michael contracts along with Alan and informs them that Van Gogh broke the law. He recalls that in a past life, under the alias Bangkok, Alex used to dissect, remembers sitting down once and considering his project. That same day, in his past life, Michael berated Donald for doing business with people like Alex. Our hero also recalls news from a past life in which Alan was involved, but he already vaguely remembers what happened then. And today, Michael wrote out all of his secrets on a piece of paper and gave it to Alan, saying it was very important. Alan looking at Michael like an idiot because he blamed Alex for something that hadn't happened yet, under the pretense that it would come true soon. Even after Michael told everything, he kept taking books from the shelf and writing down in them all the things Alex should violate. Michael turned to Alan and spoke of how he was full of sincerity and wanted the right to mine the crystals in return. He also claps him on the shoulder and talks about how they can just split the profits between them, giving a percentage to Alan. But right during the discussion, Michael noticed that during their dialogue and his life became shorter, this made him suspicious. It was only by summoning the system that Michael discovered what the blood oath had taken away from his abilities, and took again the lightning bolts of life. From that moment some time passes, our hero along with his helpers leaves, and our hero Michael remains in the camp near the mine. Looking after Alan, Michael realized that such a man was hard to fool after all. For so many days, he had gotten rather little. Michael's assistant approaches him and asks about whether the last couple of clauses in their contract are true. Michael brings up the fact that he left a strange condition that all mined seal stones are his to keep. And his second condition was that Alex must not win. And already this condition Michael liked. We followed his wishes. It was only after discussing all this that they confirmed the contract between them, which resulted in the cooperation. From that moment, some time passes. Micah in place, Jessica hide in the market and watch something. Michael initiates Jessica into his plans and tells her that if I have the opportunity to kill Alex, she should take it. Along with Jessica, Sakura notices in surprise. She turns to them and tells them that the first game is over. He talks about how the result of the game ending in a tie pleases him. Jessica's onto something. Our hero also observes that everyone around him is greatly relieved that they have succeeded, which surprises him. The other teams also cheer quite a bit, and it surprises Michael too, since none of them could win. But in a moment, one of the team notices Mike. She turns to him and talks about how it looks like they have an intruder. Michael, of course, is surprised by this. He starts making excuses, talking about being here for a reason. What surprises him is that all these people are using the coins he released and consider them very powerful. The host, meanwhile, fires off fireworks, talking about how happy she is that all the teams won. What confuses our hero is that while they were cleaning up with their competition, his men cleared many floors, which will surprise them in the future. The host informs that the third team managed to get the highest rating and get the largest number of coins. Upstairs, Alex stood and was glad that the first one of the two teams from a magical college had managed to accomplish something. Their team leader, the Hermit, was jumping around and cheering, talking about how his team was the cutest and he was the coolest. Michael turned to Jessica, told her that everything was pissing him off, and suggested that she go out for a kebab. At this point, a nearby passed, which Michael recalled, while contractually stating that it was very important. And he leaves, his house on the way. He turns to the deputy, asking about whether they checked out what Mike gave them. The deputies report that most of the information is true, and she concludes that it's likely Alex has crossed the line. And he also adds that if everything Michael has said turns out to be true, it will reveal that this has been going on for 8 years. However, Alan also considers the possibility that Michael may have simply lied to slander Alex. This option is the least believed because Michael seemed like a pretty good man and quite charitable. The men of the night squad listen to Alan carefully and talk about how they are not happy to be in the same company with such a man. While all this is going on, there is a celebration going on over the city, with all the people around cheering and congratulating each other on their victories. Meanwhile, Michael approaches Jessica and asks her home. All the older people she addresses as aunts and uncles. Jessica stated that it doesn't work that way with everyone, such as Sakura, because she's a pretty kind person without it. She tells us that they have known each other for quite a long time, as they met at the orphanage when Jessica was a little girl. From the very first day she was there, Jessica had only socialized with Sakura, for the latter had shown her kindness right away. Sakura would often ask Jessica for help, but in return always fed her delicious food. This got Jessica hooked. Jessica also tells that she went to a special research institute, after which her appetite became even stronger. From that moment, time marches forward, taking us to the roof of the building where Franklin is standing and chatting with Michael. Franklin stands on the roof and ponders why his captain has not responded to his message for 6 days now. Michael looks into his phone. Franklin continues to talk about how they haven't talked nearly every day. There's been no communication here for a long time. From that day forward, the events from the story before forward and the second phase of the competition begins, related to the new game. All the teams listen to the terms and conditions together and reflect on everything that's going on, but don't really get the gist of the new game. Among the team of magicians is our hero Michael along with Jessica, who listens carefully to the conditions of the game to change them. Immediately after announcing all the conditions, the main host announces that the game can be considered officially open. This time, a big prospect takes on a team of ogres. The leader is very angry and is going to win. He gets on the first stage of the game and declares that he can defeat any black magic. The girl from the magic squad says that everyone will be able to pass the first stage fairly easily, except the dwarves. Their leader decides to play quite aggressively. He takes a huge leap across several levels. After each of his powerful jumps, the floor breaks around him and a pillar of immense energy rises upwards. However, the desire to win all at once, it kills him, because a huge amount of wasted energy makes itself felt. The team leader from the Night Squad decides to participate in the competition and says he is going next. This man is the strongest Spartan among all the knights, named Trevor, who is known for his bravery among all.